Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Samvera Virtual Connect for 2023. My name's Heather Greer-Klein. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Samvera Community Manager, and I'm going to be your host for today. We're so happy that you're here. I'm just going to start things off with a little bit of housekeeping. Please note that this webinar has live closed captions available, so simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. The conference is being recorded, and after the sessions today and tomorrow, we'll have videos available on the Samvera YouTube channel, and slides will be available in the Samvera Community Repository, and they will also be linked directly on the schedule for today that's on the Samvera Wiki. I will send everyone links after the event. For asking questions today, we have the Q&A function. We have the chat set up so that panelists can share links with attendees, but attendees can't use the chat. We want to focus on just the Q&A and on the Connect space in the Samvera Slack workspace, just to make it a little easier for panelists to find questions. So if you need access to that Samvera Slack workspace, there's a link on the program where you can request access. We also have collaborative community notes in a Google Doc for today. So we welcome anyone to help contribute to note taking as we move through the day. And you can reach everything on the Samvera Wiki. There is a shortcut there if you go to svc.samvera.org. So today's sessions will run for 3 hours. We're going to have a 10-minute break, 2 10-minute breaks, I'm sorry. And we have an excellent schedule today. Talked about ways to ask questions. And there is a Samvera Community Code of Conduct and anti-harassment policy in place for this event, and I'll talk about that in more detail shortly. I just want to take a moment to really thank the planning committee for this year's Virtual Connect event. Nick Omenda from Tufts, Emily Ninema from Indiana University, Margaret Mellinger from Oregon State, and especially a big thank you to Indiana University because they are providing their Zoom webinar software for us to use today. So thanks everyone for helping make this happen. So a quick note about how we approach working together in the Samvera community. Samvera is dedicated to providing a welcoming and harassment-free community experience for everyone. And from the very beginning, this open source collaborative has been committed to openness and transparency in all that it does, in our code and designs and our discussions, and we're equally committed to helpful and respectful communication. So historically, women, people of color, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups have been excluded from technology work, and ironically from open source software communities in particular. So the Samvera community is committed to removing barriers to participation wherever they exist. We have community guidelines that express our values in the context of the everyday activities of the Samvera community, and they serve as the principles by which our members act and collaborate. They complement our code of conduct and anti-harassment policy. And if you haven't already, take some time to review those documents. We expect everyone who participates in all our community events and all of our forums, like the Slack channels, to honor these standards. Our helpers for today, actually, Hannah was not able to attend today, but Carolyn and Brian and Alicia should be in chat. They're great if you have any questions about the community, if you need someone in the community as a resource to reach out to, or if you have any questions or you need to make a report of a code of conduct violation. So before we get started, I just wanted to remind folks that we have a Samvera Connect, our first in-person conference since 2019, is coming up in October. It's going to be in Philadelphia, and we'll have a lot more details coming soon. But if you want to help make that event happen, you can join the program committee. You can also join the Julie Allenson Award Committee. That's our community award. You can also contribute to that community award fund. And we'll also, when we get closer to the date, have opportunities for folks to volunteer in person at the conference to help make it happen. So I'll share some links for all of that in an email after today's sessions, but really excited to be able to see people in person in October, and I hope you can join us then. So now I am going to hand things over to our first presenter, Leanne Bradford.
Okay, good morning. Welcome. I'm so excited to kick things off here at the Samvera Virtual Connect this year. Hope everyone is having a great day today, and I'm excited to hear all of the talks this year. There's some really good stuff coming up. I'm Leanne Bradford. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior software engineer at Software Services by Scientist.com. I've been working on Samvera projects since I joined our company, which was formerly known as Nachi, almost 6 years ago now. Today, I'm going to be presenting a talk called Turn That Big Challenge into Big Growth. Big challenges and struggles will help us grow more than when we're not being challenged, and overcoming obstacles, learning from our struggles and mistakes. It makes us more resilient and resourceful, and it helps to set us up for success in the future. But when we're faced with a big challenge, it can be really daunting. So you might just not know where to start. And when you think about how to achieve the whole result of your challenge, it can be really overwhelming. There's just too much to do. So today I'm going to be sharing a few strategies that I have discovered in my career for tackling big challenges. In software engineering, you might be presented with just an idea or maybe a loosely scoped request. And it can be overwhelming to translate these ideas into a project with actionable tasks. So outside of software, you might face other projects or challenges like throwing a big fundraiser for an organization, or maybe you want to remodel your kitchen or do some other personal goal. Maybe you just have some hardship in your life that you really need to get through. These strategies can translate to any challenge that you're facing. In fact, you can use them as well as a tool for meeting your career milestones. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today. Mainly, we're going to talk about breaking down projects into smaller pieces. We're going to talk about why it's important, and about a few strategies that you can use to do that. And we're going to look at what this looks like on an example project. Then we're going to talk about some other considerations on larger projects when you're breaking them down. For example, we're going to go over milestones and timelines, and we're going to talk about dependencies within your projects. Okay, let's get started. So I'm mainly going to be focusing today on software engineering things that we get from our stakeholders. We might get an idea or just a vague request. So how do we translate that request into actionable items that are small enough for anyone on our team to accomplish in a reasonable amount of time? So ideally, we would like to be able to finish a task in one day. But if that's not possible, we definitely want it to be finished within one sprint. And writing software, it's complicated. It's a complicated undertaking. And as we all know, it's counterproductive to try and think through a big problem in one sitting. So instead, you have to break your big software into modules. And at any given time, you can either think about how those modules work together at the highest level, or you can think about the inner workings of a single module, but it's overwhelming and probably not practical to think about the whole problem and all of its detail at one time. So why do we want to do this? Here's a few reasons that we would want to learn about how to break down problems. First, it keeps us on task. If we get a task or a ticket that's not well defined, we're probably going to get off task. We might go off on an unrelated tangent. I've done that, and I can tell you it doesn't help you. It doesn't help your clients, your company, your employer, and we just don't want to do that. Secondly, it eliminates scope creep. So when your tickets are narrowed down to a specific task, both you and your stakeholders have a better understanding of what you're doing. Everyone's on the same page, and your scope creep becomes instead a new project with separate tickets or separate tasks to achieve. It also removes bottlenecks, both from the start of your project as well as the finish of the project. So no one really wants to start working on a vague project with no direction. And it's really tough to see a project through to the end when there's no end in sight. So again, I've been a part of projects that were vague and weren't broken down into smaller pieces, and those projects were finished way behind schedule. And finally, it increases productivity. Vagueness is a productivity killer, but being specific keeps us engaged, and we're not only more productive, we feel more accomplished, and we are happier. So remember, the goal here for these strategies is to break down a project into tasks that'll be finished within a reasonable time frame. So once you have your project broken down into bite-sized pieces, you still need a strategy for breaking down the tasks. And I want to talk a little bit about tasks and why, as a software engineer, this is important. So first off, sometimes you just don't know where to begin. I still run into this once in a while, but I feel like this is how I felt with every ticket when I was a junior developer. I just didn't know where to begin. Secondly, honestly, developers really like to make things more complicated than they need to be sometimes, especially when you're first starting out. So I feel like this is a symptom of really not understanding what the problem actually is. But anyway, learning to break down problems will help you with this. Breaking down a task is an essential developer skill, and it's arguably the most essential skill you can have as a software engineer. And finally, it's a great way to level up your career. It's a win-win situation for ourselves and for our employers. So when I first started out as a developer, I didn't really have a strategy for tackling issues. I would just jump in without a plan and I'd bumble my way around. And I just can't stress enough how poor of a strategy this was. I've had a few projects that went totally sideways, partly because I was inexperienced and I didn't realize how important planning was. Honestly, who wants to sit through another meeting, right? Like, I just thought it was kind of a waste of time. And also because I was just ambitious and I thought I could figure it out if I just jumped in and started coding. The good news is that I learned from my failures, and I know now how important the thought work is that goes into preparing a project for a team to work on. Okay, so the two strategies I'm going to be talking about today to share with you are the top-down approach and categorizing. There you go. So the top-down approach is a really popular method for breaking projects down and tasks down. And I really want to emphasize that this is about breaking down the project into smaller pieces, and it's not about trying to solve the problems that go along with each task. We're just identifying what needs to be done. Say, for example, you get a feature request. Your stakeholders have an idea and they give you a request. And the first thing you do is start by listing the large sweeping pieces that the project is going to need. So you don't want to shave the yak here. You're just looking at the biggest chunks that are going to get you to the end goal of that idea. It's often to use a whiteboard for this. You would start with listing your overarching pieces at the top of the board. And you want to leave a lot of white space around everything because you're going to fill in those spaces as you narrow ideas down. Once you have your large pieces in place, you can break down each of the larger pieces into smaller sections, and then you still want to leave more space. As you continue to break down the items, you're going to see more opportunities to break things further down into smaller and smaller pieces. Sometimes you might have a big category item and you know it needs to be broken down smaller, but you just don't know how you're going to do that yet. You haven't decided on implementation strategies, or you don't know how to do it. That's okay. You'll just get to that later. Sometimes that's going to be clearer as you're moving along in the project. So how might we break down larger tasks into smaller ones? Like specifically some ideas. One idea might be to separate the building and the styling of your UI components from the making the UI components functional. So you might have a front end, back end kind of separation. As Rails developers in the Samvera community, you might separate your functionality in the model view controller architecture. So you might try maybe separate the models, the controller actions and routes, and the views. But anyway, you're just going to keep going until you don't think it would be reasonable to break down the task any further. At that point, each item at the bottom of your tree should be a single sentence, and that should become the title for your issues that you create if you're using an issue board. Step 4 and 5 on this slide are where you would fill out your tickets with descriptions and acceptance criteria and implementation instructions. And I'm going to talk about those steps after we talk about categorizing, which is another method for breaking down projects. So categorizing is when you break a project down into categories. And I kind of think of this more as like a brainstorming exercise. When you use a top-down approach, you're starting with the highest level of tasks, but in categorizing, you aren't really limiting yourself to the highest level items first. With categorizing, you're going to start out by asking which steps need to be performed for the project to be finished. As you break down super large tasks, you are going to start to see patterns emerge. And these patterns are going to help you group your tasks into smaller clusters, and your smaller clusters of work are going to fall into the large sweeping categories. Now, as you continue, the grouping becomes more apparent and more clear. And again, we're not creating tickets at the stage or trying to solve individual problems. We're just identifying what needs to get done. And you can use notes, spreadsheets, whiteboards, or any other general document for organizing this. And at the end, you're going to end up with a single sentence summary of all of the tasks. Again, the summaries are going to become the title of the new issues, and your titles and your descriptions are going to be filled out later. Okay, so let's talk about completing the issues now. First off, we need to decide, should we decide how the tasks should be done when you're creating your issues? When you know there's a series of tasks that have to be completed in a specific way in order to complete a piece of functionality, it's going to be necessary for a task to have a specific approach outlined. If a developer takes a different approach, it might not mesh with the other tickets in the grouping. So you really want to make that clear in your implementation instructions. If there's some uncertainty with the project or there's potentially changing requirements, the best approach might be to file a placeholder ticket with some initial thoughts. You can have a list of what needs to happen in order to make the decision and a list of follow-up tasks. Then as other work is completed, the path and the solution might be more clear than it was when you started the project. If you're struggling with thinking of concrete action steps, you can put steps on the ticket that will help you gain more clarity, or create a ticket that will help you gain more clarity, such as figure out who can help me plan project X, maybe, or contact person Y. They did a similar project to project X and ask them how they would do it. We can read up on how to do a certain project, or you can Google how to do project X. So maybe you decide you're just going to make the call and decide how a project should be done, or how a task should be done. If someone on the team has expertise in a certain area, you need to rely on their expertise. For example, if someone has expertise in accessibility, you would always want to consult them when you're reviewing designs. You can also get your whole team together to come up with a plan. You can use decision documents or architectural decision records to document your approach. What is that? What's a decision doc and architectural decision record? They're documents that help you define and communicate the decision-making process. You would use them to weigh pros and cons of various decisions, and you would outline why a specific decision was made, and you'll have that record for the future when you're kind of questioning, why are we doing things this way? If things change, you can always update stuff later. Sometimes you might need a spike ticket at an early stage just to make sure that a task is actually feasible. I would say at least one engineer should be in on early meetings with the project stakeholders, so that the engineering team will always have context of what the problem is that you're trying to address, and to where follow along with the evolution of a project. If your feature or your project is going to have a UI feature, you should probably have an engineer involved, or at least reviewing early wireframes and designs, so that any issues can be caught early, and it just makes sure that everyone will be on the same page. We want to make sure our issue descriptions would have any context needed to understand what the ticket is asking. Our issues should link to other related issues and also to any relevant documentation. And all issues should be clear on what is needed to close the issue. We want to know what is our definition of done. We like to add acceptance criteria on our tickets internally at Scientist. This helps our developers know exactly what needs to be accomplished, and it also helps with our quality assurance and with our stakeholder sign-off. Let's take a moment to talk about ways to problem solve a specific task. For general problem solving, this is a good structure to help you not only solve problems, but to come up with a the best solution or a good solution. So you can start with defining the problem. If you don't know exactly what the problem is, you're probably not going to come up with the right solution. If you're having trouble defining the problem, you need to reach out to your team or your project manager, and you make sure you understand what you're solving for. We want to come up with more than one solution. It's a good idea to think of more than one way to solve the issue at hand. So in programming, we know there's almost always more than one way to do something, but there's trade-offs with all the different implementations. So you want to come up with more than one good idea. And next, you want to evaluate your solutions and pick the best one. So you might need to take into consideration the time it takes, space or memory usage. You might need to consider accessibility or cost. There's a lot of things to consider, and you need to find out what's most important to your project. And finally, you're going to implement your solution. So remember, instead of trying to finish a task perfectly, you want to think of it as choosing the right solution for the project that you're working on. All right, let's look at an example. This is an example of a top-down approach to a software project. So you can see at the top, we have the name of the application, and then we have four large sweeping categories. And then in this, the large sweeping categories are now being broken down into smaller sections. And finally, and this is one section, and it is broken down again into smaller categories and to individual sections. Some of the highest priority, next I'm going to go over some considerations about planning our work after we broke down the project into smaller tickets. Some of our highest priority tasks might not be obvious at first. Tasks can be blocked by other tasks because clusters of work have a general order in which they need to be done. So first, we want to find out which tasks are going to take priority over others, which ones are blocking other tasks. We want to identify any scheduling issues and possible workflow problems by doing this. And we want to find opportunities for speeding up the workflow. You need to build things on top of each other as the work is completed. So using these dependencies is a good way to batch groups of work together. And you can make sure that tasks that unblock the others are completed first. And then you can divvy up these sections of work so that your work can be parallelized. Different groups can complete unrelated sections of work, and it can speed up your timeline. For larger projects, you might want to consider using milestones or setting milestones, and then identify the tasks that are a part of the milestones. So how do we set milestones? Like the easiest way to create milestones is just to base it on the length of a project. So if a project spans multiple months of work, you would create monthly milestones. If a project spans multiple weeks of work, you want to create weekly or sprint milestones. And if your project is one sprint or shorter, you probably don't need any milestones at all. It might be overkill there. Another way to set milestones is to use your phases or categories or parts. An example of phases as milestones might be the planning phase, the development and testing phase, documentation phase, quality assurance and feedback phase. You can also use the highest level of your breakdowns to use as milestones. So if you use categorizing as your methodology, it might make sense to use those categories. You can separate by the type of work. For example, you can have a back-end milestone, front-end milestone, or infrastructure, for example. There are different ways to break a project into milestones, and the best way depends on the nature of the project, but it's always important to clearly define what reaching a milestone entails. If your definition of done is when the code is working in the production environment, then you reach your milestone when that point is reached. A big question we always get is, how long is this going to take? The first consideration is basically the size and number of individual tasks that you've created. Some work can be completed in parallel, so our timelines will have overlapping sections. And you especially want to allow time for feedback, any quality assurance and bug fixes. And if a project has some uncertainty, you're definitely going to want to allow for extra time for hashing out any missing or changing pieces. It's important to create a timeline for completing your tasks because having a deadline makes you more focused for each of your tasks. All right, so some final thoughts. We want to make sure that we're looking at the big picture. We want to make sure that we understand what our end product is supposed to look like. We want to examine all the parts of the tasks. We want to figure out step by step what you need to do, because it's not going to happen through magic. We want to think about the logical order of completing the pieces, like what should we do first, second, third. We want to complete our task early enough to have time left for feedback, for reviews, and for any revisions. We want to create a timeline for completing our tasks, especially having a deadline, because having a deadline makes you more focused. I'm the type of person that needs a deadline to complete just about anything. If I have a deadline, I'll get it done right at the deadline. So I don't think I'm alone in that. And we want to have a plan to help us stay on track. So we want to make sure the time that we need to spend on the project is part of our daily schedule. And we want to stick to our plan, because our plan is only good if we see it all the way through. Thank you. That is it for me, unless we have questions.
Thank you, Leanne. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. There may be some in Slack. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
So next up, we have a lightning talk, Out of Time, Managing Your Time Without a DeLorean, from Daniel Pierce and Jim Halliday at Indiana University.
Thank you, Heather. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Pierce. I'm a developer at Indiana University Libraries. Jim Halliday, I don't think he'll be talking today. He'll just be in chat to answer any questions. So as I assume most of you know, I've been serving as the Hyrax technical lead for going on a year now, close to. And as part of that, I was asked to talk about how I manage my time between doing IU projects and Samvera projects. So that's easy because I have a time machine. I keep it right next to my desk whenever I need to manage my time better. But just in case not everyone has a time machine like that, then I can talk a little bit more about what I do when it's on the fritz. So the goal that I was given is to spend about half my time on IU projects and half my time on Samvera projects, whether that's specifically like being Hyrax tech lead. I mean, that's the majority of the time. But it's not a precise target. It's just kind of a ballpark. So that's what I've been aiming for. It's a little tricky sometimes because the projects I do at IU are also Samvera project, or well, it's Hyrax, right? We have a site called Digital Collections, one of many sites called Digital Collections in the community, as I've learned. So work on that is also kind of implicitly Hyrax. But if there's a question about how do I categorize a specific period of time as being Hyrax or I should say Samvera or IU, then I ask myself, would I be doing this if I were not tech lead? And if the answer is yes, then I consider it IU time. So how to track that amount of time? I mean, I could do just a educated guesstimation, but I came up with finding a program. Let me share my screen here real quick. All right, you should see web browser says welcome to Time Warrior. Yeah, so I decided that I needed to be a time warrior if I was going to have a time machine. No, not really. This is a, well, as it says, Time Warrior is a free and open source software that tracks time from the command line. This is what I found to work well for myself. The command line bit in particular, I realize that that's maybe not what everyone would prefer to do to track their time. There's many programs like this out here, but this one comes packaged with Fedora Linux, so it's easy to install. I thought I'd give just a quick demo of what it can do or how I use it. So let's see here. Let's bring up this. So it's just a command line utility. Currently, if you just type it in, it says what you're tracking. Currently tracking IU time. If I start working on something that's Hyrax time, you do time W start Hyrax. And then it switches over. And then if I'm done working, then time W stop and stops. End of the day. Now maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I didn't mean to stop. Maybe I started tracking the wrong thing. That's when I have to get my time machine out and use the undo command. And then we can see if we just type in time W again, we're back to tracking Hyrax. You can also do things like start IU 1 minute ago. No, well, I haven't waited long enough. But you can go backwards in time a little bit. So it is kind of like a time machine. So after you've done all that, you can get some reports. Time W week will show you how your time's been going this week. I was up a little late last night working on that Hyrax 4.0 RC2 release, so that day was a bit long, I admit. You can also get a month look, which isn't going to show much because this is the beginning of the month. So maybe we can take a look at the fortnight, which would be this week and the prior week. And you can see that, yeah, a lot of Hyrax time happened last week. Looks great. But the goal of keeping track of all this time is how close am I to 50/50 time? And for that, I had to go look at some extensions for Time Warrior. And funny enough, there's one called Cat Report. And it actually totals up all the different time you've tracked by the tag. Either in my case, I've been using Hyrax or IU, and shows you what the percentage share is over that amount of time. In this case, since I started tracking towards the beginning of my stint as tech lead. And this also can do the time period. So get a cat report for just the past fortnight. And you can see that it's 90% Hyrax, but I'll make it up. So that's what I'm doing. Hopefully Jim is happy with all this. I'd like to encourage everyone to share what they do to track their time in chat, because I'm curious what methods they use. And I'll take a look if there's any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. I have a question. How do you find that, because we have the Hyrax maintenance working group working in 2 week on, 2 week off sprints, do you find that your time focused on Hyrax ends up correlating to that, or do you have times where it sort of goes off cycle based on community needs?
There's a good mix. Actually, let me reshare my screen real quick. Because there's actually we can do last quarter. And you can see over many weeks, just the mix. So it does follow, I try to be on task with the sprints, but our sprint cycle at IU there's some slight overlap and therefore slight gaps when one isn't specifically running or the others, overlapped a little bit, but it hasn't really been a big problem. Jim and the rest of the team here has been gracious enough to let me focus on that.
That's great. Thank you. Looks like we've got a question in the Q&A or just a comment. Alicia has used Clockify to track time for a few years now, and the entire SoftServe team uses Clockify. That's one option. And hopefully, I bet folks are sharing others that they use in the Slack channel. Right. Any other questions for Daniel?
Yeah, like I mentioned, there's lots of tools out there, but this one popped up and seemed easy enough to use.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Up next, we have another lightning talk from Michael B. Klein at Northwestern University, Developing in the Cloud, an update.
Thanks. Good morning. My name is Michael Klein. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the software development tech lead in Northwestern University Library's repository and digital curation work group. I'm here today to provide a quick update on the cloud-based development environment hosted on Amazon Web Services that I talked about at last October's Samvera Connect meeting. So just to recap a little bit from last time, what we did was transition to developing directly on AWS EC2 instances. We're developing a lot of applications to run in the cloud. So now we are developing them directly in the cloud using, instead of using emulated resources, we're just using actual AWS provisioned resources. Most of them start up, spin down, and scale as needed. We don't have to start up our dev machines. They just start when we try to connect to them, and they shut down after they detect some idle time. We use a combination of shared and individual resources. Things like data storage is individual because we're all working with different test data. But for example, we have separate schemas within a shared database instance, separate indexes within a shared Elasticsearch or OpenSearch cluster, and things like that. It has built-in Visual Studio Code integration through the use of a plugin that a VS Code extension that allows SSH connections, and that just kind of works seamlessly. And we've got a system for automated backups, updates, and maintenance so that when there are new tools to be deployed, they can be sent out to everybody's dev machines at once, but without taking over completely and preventing people from customizing things how they like. So what's new since then? We've switched from Aurora PostgreSQL Serverless version 1 to version 2. We had to give up the ability to scale all the way down to 0 when idle. So the system is always running at a pretty low level. But what we get back is that instead of scaling exponentially, where the next one up always doubles your resources, it goes linearly. We can scale half of a compute unit at a time. It's a nebulous kind of metric, but it lets us move in smaller increments, and it scales back down much faster. So in the long run, it's a better deal for us. We've added Fedora and Solr instances to our shared cloud development stack, which is improving our ability to work on Samvera-based applications in the cloud. We've added a dedicated test environment for continuous integration. So we've got a static set of test data, always waiting to have the same tests run against them. Cleaned up some unused and unnecessary resources that were costing us money and not providing us much benefit. And we added some uptime alerts. Right now, I'm the only one who receives them. I do get notified when my or anyone else's box is up for longer than 8 hours, and I get notified again when it shuts down after that. It's just kind of a little check to make sure we don't have runaway resources on the things that cost money. So what's been good? We released our first project that was developed end-to-end in this environment. It was our digital collections API, which we started in July of last year and officially released this past February. My previous presentation mentioned that we still hadn't found a solution for someone forgetting to shut down and leaving their environment running all weekend beyond the uptime notifications that I mentioned before. But it hasn't been a noticeable problem. You know, people have just kind of gotten used to shutting down or closing out, and the system is better at detecting idle time and disconnecting. Another concern that I brought up last October was the proprietary nature of the VS Code remote SSH plugin that we use and the lack of a viable open source alternative. And we had a lot of talk about that in the chat as well back then. So I am very happy to report that the open source SSH Remote Connect plugin for the VS Codium, the open source fork of VS Code, has improved to the point where it's a viable alternative to the proprietary component. As of my last presentation, we were using developer instances based on a virtual machine image that took about 1.5 minutes to start up and 5 to 7 minutes to shut down, which was a big mystery. This was a problem because once the system detects that it's idle and starts to shut down, you have to wait for it to power all the way off and then trigger it to start up again before you can reconnect, which is a really long 7 minutes. So since then, we've switched over to a much leaner system that boots in about 45 seconds and shuts down in less than 30 seconds. So it's really been a lot easier to deal with those false timeouts and shutdowns to the point where I usually don't even notice if it's happened. But the best news of all is that it's been pretty quiet. The remote dev environment hasn't been something we talk about a whole lot, except when we need a little better documentation on something. So either things are going really well or the rest of the team is just keeping all of their complaints to themselves, and I don't know about them. I promised my therapist I'd try to eliminate negative language from my slide titles, so here's this one. What opportunities do we have to improve? As I mentioned in my previous talk, the SSH forwarding agent that lets us seamlessly sign commits, connect to GitHub, and do other public key authentication things without storing our keys in the cloud has a silent timeout that can be a real nuisance. It just stops working with no warning. We still haven't worked out a totally painless solution to that one, or even a real reliable workaround that's easier than completely disconnecting and reconnecting the whole session. That's really my biggest peeve at the moment, and I spend a little time each week trying to suss that one out. VS Code still loses its connection on occasion, especially when the local system sits idle for a long time or goes to sleep. Reconnecting is usually quick. I haven't found it to be too annoying, but it is a thing. When AWS launched their new OpenSearch serverless service in January, we had high hopes that we'd be able to scale it way down when it's idle, the same way we do with the database. But it turns out that their service is not a true pay-as-you-go service the way their other serverless offerings are. They're really kind of misusing the term serverless on this one, in my opinion. So we've had to stick with our always-on cluster. And finally, getting our two Samvera applications, our Hyrax-based institutional repository and our Avalon-based Course Reserves audiovisual repository up and running in the development environment can be a little bit touch and go. It's still something we have to wrestle with every time we do it. So I still hope that there's room to improve on that. But we also now have a full year's worth of cost data to look at, and we're still completely lacking in surprises, which is great news. We're still hovering close to around $150 per month in total costs, give or take. It's nice and predictable. We'll see how that holds up when we start adding more stuff to our stack, like when we start investigating maybe some AI tools and some of the other things that AWS has to offer. But so far, so good on that. Cost per developer has stayed pretty constant and predictable as well. The OpenSearch and Aurora PostgreSQL services still cost more than the rest of us combined every month. So if we're fortunate enough to be able to expand our team at some point, we can predict that they're not likely to push up costs by more than about $20 a month per developer. And again, some of this depends on what other resources we might start to pull in, but I think we've gotten pretty good at cost estimating and predicting by this point. And really, the boring lack of surprises really is the best I could have hoped for from this entire thing. As always, I am happy to answer questions online, offline, talk about this, accept suggestions and contributions, or help anyone else out who's considering doing this kind of work on their own. And that's it for our update. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to get an update and see how this is progressing. We have a couple minutes if anyone has any questions for Michael. Okay, I don't see any in the Q&A, although some may come into Slack. Thank you, Michael.
Sure, thank you.
So now is our scheduled break. We have a little bit of extra times, but we'll still go to the top of the hour. So that's 12 p.m. Eastern. And we will come back here for the next part of our day. All right, welcome back, everyone. And we are going to kick back off with a presentation from DM about preventing scope creep.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Let me share my screen. All right. Can you all see my slideshow?
Looks great.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, let me hide your faces real quick. All right, cool. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for anybody else on the East Coast. My name is Yin Tran. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a software validation engineer at scientist.com. I made some last minute changes to my talk to make it a little more applicable to any product team. So the title looks a little different from what you saw on the schedule. Today, my talk is going to be about how can you prevent scope creep, employing empathetic words to mitigate scope creep on tickets with feedback. Thanks to my teammate, Leanne Bradford, for introducing a bit of this topic earlier during her talk today. First, we're going to talk about the problem itself. What's going on with tickets with feedback? Next, we're going to talk about the solution. What strategies can we employ with empathetic words to prevent scope creep? Part 1 of the solution lies in the acceptance criteria and testing instructions. Part 2 of the solution is listing other known issues related to the ticket. After that, we'll discuss how to ping the team on Slack to make the first move. And finally, communication, 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 responding to the team's problems. So what do I mean about scope creep on tickets with feedback? Let's look at an example of what I mean by that. Let's say it's Monday morning and you come to sprint planning. You look at your Kanban board, see what's in the ready for development column, and you say to yourself, hey, mow the lawn. That sounds simple and easy enough. I've done something like this before in another project, so I think I could do this one too. So you assign yourself a ticket, write the code, get it in code review, deploy to staging, and after some back and forth with QA, it passes. It leaves the QA column on your Kanban board, and without a doubt, you can say to yourself, I mowed the lawn. This ticket passes QA, and this ticket is done. Then, all of a sudden, your team comes back to you saying, this ticket isn't done. The dishes are still dirty. The laundry hasn't been done yet, and the toilet is in the kitchen. Drop a thumbs up in the chat if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes the team comes back to you with feedback that you know is outside of the ticket scope. What's up with that? This is the problem. And this problem leads to other problems. It leads to miscommunication on a ticket scope, which could then lead to rework or a long back and forth about what the ticket mowing the lawn is really about. This leads to time lost and dev hours lost, which means money down in the budget. Funnily enough, a lot of these issues can actually be prevented when you just take a moment to empathize with your team and stakeholders, employ the right words to address their needs, and understand their experience. Next, we talk about the solution. How can we use empathetic words to prevent scope creep on tickets with feedback? Part 1 of the solution starts at the very beginning, even before development begins and QA starts. It's having clear acceptance criteria and testing instructions. How does including clear acceptance criteria help QAing within a ticket scope? Well, the acceptance criteria itself is what determines a ticket scope. These are generally written before development begins. Clear acceptance criteria help developers understand the end goal of their code. Not only that, it helps QA understand the end goal of testing. Adding issue templates in GitHub helps establish the standard of including acceptance criteria in all tickets. So let's look at a real-world example. Adventist number 228, no method error for CSV importer. As the name of the ticket may suggest, Adventist was having many issues with CSV imports. One of its many issues was receiving a no method error when an importer completed. We'll be coming back to this example a lot in this talk. And this is an example where a ticket's acceptance criteria and testing instructions may have led to a failure response from a stakeholder. So what do we notice about this ticket's acceptance criteria? I'll give you all a moment to look it over. If you notice, there are no acceptance criteria on this ticket. And as we learned in the last slide, a ticket's acceptance criteria are what determines the scope of the ticket. If there are no acceptance criteria, how can we truly determine if a ticket is complete or if it needs rework? Omitting the right words on a ticket is an invitation for scope creep to occur. Next, let's take a look at number 228, testing instructions. The very last step indicates that the record should successfully process. Without acceptance criteria, what do the words successfully process really mean? We'll come back to 228's testing instructions in a couple of slides. So not only are clear acceptance criteria essential to a ticket scope, but clear testing instructions are just as important. Just like there are best practices for development, like don't deploy to production on a Friday, you should write tests for any code changes, and you should write a descriptive commit message. There are also best practices for writing testing instructions as well. First off, testing instructions can always be added or updated after development is completed. Sometimes you don't know how to test something until after it's already developed, so it is totally fine to add testing instructions at the very end. You can also include a screenshot of an example of a failure in the ticket. This can help frame the scope within your teammates' minds. But this one can be tough to find since we tend to be quick to delete bugged items on production, but if you're able to do it, it can definitely help a lot in the long run. You should also include updated sample files for testing. This ensures that we are validating the correct data and formats, making your testing instructions more useful. This was actually an issue at Adventus number 228 as well, which was a missed opportunity for me to verify if we were using up-to-date testing materials. Updated testing instructions should be at the top of the ticket. Some threads are 20 to 30 comments long, which can be full of dense and even conflicting discussion. Just like how updated acceptance criteria should be at the top of the ticket to help developers, updated testing instructions should also be at the top of the ticket to help whoever is doing QA. This helps keep your testing instructions concise. Every ticket should have testing instructions. Yes, even the ones that are not QA testable. If it lands in the QA column, then someone is going to look at it as if it were QA testable. Otherwise, you should just close your ticket or move it to the next column if it's not testable. It takes 1 minute to write not QA testable, but it'll save hours of wait time in between when somebody asks for clarification. One of the biggest best practices is simply empathizing with your testers and reading your tester instructions to a rubber duck. We'll explore what empathizing with your testers means in a bit. And lastly, make sure that the end result is cut and clear. We're going to revisit Adventus number 228 to see what that really means. Empathize with your testers and read your instructions to rubber duck. Well, what does that really mean? Well, we should put ourselves in our reader's shoes. We may know everything about this ticket and its life cycle, but can a stakeholder who doesn't attend every daily stand-up come in, read this ticket, and understand its purpose and limitations? As a reminder, Adventus number 228 is called no method error for CSV importer. We can assume that this means that when we're testing, we should look to see if the CSV importer leads to any no method errors. In the original testing instructions, the last step says the record should successfully process. However, if y'all remember, this ticket didn't have any acceptance criteria, and that makes it kind of hard to understand what a successful process really means within the scope of this ticket. So let's read a stakeholder's notes after they QA'd this ticket. Test 2 did not populate the ARC identifier field, which we need. This was actually my mistake because I didn't take the time to verify if the test sample files were up to date. So I did not follow best practices for testing instructions here. Next, she says, both tests failed to map relation is part of to part of. And finally, she says, both tests failed to map format extent to extent. The problem here is that the CSV parser created generic works rather than image works. I need guidance on how to indicate to the CSV parser what work type to use. Please let me know. Because of these three things, our stakeholder considered this a QA fail, and this was kicked back for rework. Now, Can y'all look at this and tell me where in this message does our stakeholder mention that the CSV importer failed due to a no method error? Well, she doesn't. Instead, she mentions two other failures unrelated to this ticket scope. So what happened here? Perhaps she didn't understand what successfully processed really meant in the testing instructions, and with no acceptance criteria to guide her, she was thinking outside of the ticket scope. This is why it's important to take a moment to empathize with your testers and read your instructions to a rubber duck. If you can write instructions to make your rubber duck understand how to test this ticket and what's considered a pass or fail, then you are one step closer to creating empathetic testing instructions. Make sure that the end result is cut and clear. So here's what we did to improve this ticket's testing instructions. We added a single sentence that says, there are no method errors that show up on imported bricks. Now, this isn't foolproof, and as we'll see later in my talk, there is still so much more we can do, but it's a start in the right direction for testing instruction best practices. Being empathetic and putting ourselves in our stakeholders' shoes, we added a mere 10 words to clarify the pass-fail criteria on this ticket. Now, how else can we use the right words to empathize with our readers' mindsets? Solution 2 is to list other known issues. So let's go back to Adventus number 228, no method error for CSV importer. Of the many cogs in the Adventus bulk racks machine, there were many other CSV importer tickets. There are issues with work types, relationships, and even 194 relation is part of, something that our stakeholder mentioned in her QA comment on number 228. Now that we see this list, we know for sure that her comment about relation is part of is out of scope for 228. If we list all of the other known related issues on the ticket, we could help our team think within the scope of the ticket. You can also say, if this ticket passes and no other issues, and other issues are found, please create a new ticket for that bug. By including just a bit more information, we could take the mental load off of our teammates so they can better understand what is within this ticket scope and what's not. So these last two strategies focus on effective communication. This strategy here focuses on what you can do to take initiative, making the first move by pinging the team on Slack. Pinging the team on Slack can be a quick way to communicate a ticket's intent and what to do if a ticket fails QA. It also pushes the team to test sooner so that tickets don't get stale in QA. It also helps us push a ticket to deploy to production in time. So let's use Adventus imported issues again for a hypothetical example. We can say, hey team, we have moved some tickets over into QA. These are the acceptance criteria for these tickets. We're currently working on imported issues. We know there's more work going on and there are more imported tickets. If this passes the strict criteria, but you're still seeing other issues, let us know and we'll make new tickets. We're aware of these other issues on these tickets. And finally, if you're finding new issues after running this test, please create new tickets for them. I also have a real world example from Poundly Palsy. I sent this to the Poundly Palsy client channel Wednesday evening so they could see it Thursday morning in hopes that they can do some client QA in time for the production deploy on the same day. I outline all 3 tickets that are waiting for their QA, how to test them, what to expect, and what's considered a pass or fail. I then let them know that they could ping me for any questions at any time so we can get these tickets across the line as soon as possible. As you can see, making the first move by pinging the team on Slack and setting the expectations right then and there can reduce scope creep. Our final strategy is simply to respond to your team's problems. Another lesson in effective communication. So let's look back at our stakeholders QA notes for Adventus 228, no method error for CSV importer. She says, test 2 did not populate the ARC identifier field, which we need. Again, this was my mistake because I didn't verify if the test sample files were up to date. Next, she says, both tests failed to map relation is part of to part of. And finally, she says, both tests failed to map format extent to extent. So how we could have responded was, it looks like you didn't see any no method errors. Can we close this ticket and continue working at other tickets? In other words, was the original problem solved though? Fortunately, my teammate Kirk has much better etiquette than I do, so this is how he responded. When our stakeholder said, I need guidance on how to indicate to the CSV parser what work type to use, Kirk said, to answer your generic work question, if the model isn't specified in the CSV, the generic work is the default work type. When our stakeholder said, test 2 did not populate the arc identifier field, Kirk said, the reason why arc identifier wasn't showing up was likely because you took it out of the CSV. I'm not sure if taking it out of the CSV was intended. I'd like to understand this part better. This was actually my mistake, so thanks for being kind about that, Kirk. And finally, when our stakeholder said, both tests failed to map a relation is part of to part of, which again, relation is part of is addressed in ticket number 194, not this ticket number 228. Kirk said, the mapping for part of has been adjusted, so it shows up now. The right statement now renders as human readable fields instead of displaying the URI. He responded to each and every one of her problems. When you do that, you take a moment to empathize with your teammates' concerns, understand where they're coming from, and gently guide them to think within a ticket scope so they can QA it for what it's truly about. So it's all about communication and using the right words to be empathetic to mitigate scope creep. So thank you all for attending my very first conference talk. Apologies for the last minute changes that didn't make it to the program notes. I hope I was able to share some valuable tips to empathize with your readers to help reduce scope creep on tickets with feedback. Thank you to everyone who helped contribute real world examples for my talk. Here's my LinkedIn if you want to connect. Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Yim. That was fantastic. I can't believe that's your first conference presentation. It's so helpful to see
Thank you so
examples
much.
like that. Those examples were wonderful. There's some good conversation
Thank
in
you.
the Connect chat about taking some of your ideas and using them to adjust some of our community templates to get some of this kind of back and forth into our community tickets. So thank you. Are there any questions?
No, thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any in the QA. I'll give it a minute. All right, great. If there's any questions, we can feel free to check the Connect Slack.
Yes, thank you. And if you have any questions, you could reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent. Well, up next, we have our community technology updates. First up is the Avalon community update from John Cameron at Indiana University.
Hello, everyone. Set up here. All right. Hi, I'm John Cameron of Indiana University Libraries, and I'm here to give the Avalon Media System update. So quick start off, what is Avalon? It's a solution bundle based on Samvera stack components that's designed to be an audio and video access platform. So what makes Avalon unique are sort of easy transcoding, very specific access controls. It's sort of designed around a lot of the use cases from libraries and archives for audiovisual material. And our latest release is Avalon 7.6. The Avalon team, you can see us here. We recently got together in person. We were able to take a new team photo, which I've put up there. So I'm excited one day we'll get that on the website. And before I want to give the update, just shout out to our community. Currently on our website, we have 19 institutions listed. And then we have some in progress implementations of Avalon at Michigan State University. We're still working on a project with them. And this was part of the origin of the controlled digital lending in Avalon 7.5 that I'll mention. And then UCSD. So what's new? I'm just going to talk about the releases in Avalon that have happened over the past month since the last Samvera Connect. 7.5, 7.5.1, 7.6, and then RAMP, which is our library of media player components that I'll go into. So we've been busy. We had a couple minor releases and a point release. So what's new in 7.5? The big feature was controlled digital lending. So this is a fairly simple implementation of controlled digital lending. And then we also had a lot of fixes and different bugs and enhancements that had accumulated. And so there's quite a long list of things that we had changed, with the big ones called out here below. Yeah, so controlled digital lending. It's, again, something you can set up for an Avalon install. It's enabled and disabled at the collection level, so you can have some collections be limited by this. It allows administrators to set up collection level defaults for lending periods and things like that. And there's a dashboard that users can use within. So this isn't set up in any production Avalon at the moment, but hopefully this will be part of MSU's setup as we go forward. So here you can see an example of what it looks like in Avalon, where media resources are gated by this need to, log into the system and then do a checkout or borrow action. And then they can be returned at any time. Again, we made it so very flexible in terms of time. But again, if it's configured, this will pop up in terms of controlled digital lending. And if you want to talk controlled digital lending, I would love to hear more about what anybody else is doing in the community. Okay, and then this point release 7.5.1, we had some fixes that we really wanted to get out there. Main one was with rendering the transcript viewer, and just a lot of these little fixes that were important to get out. The next big one, though, is 7.6, where we went through and upgraded our big dependencies. This was our Rails 7 Ruby 3 update release. And we've got a few other things in there as well. We had written a Google Drive adapter for Browse Everything that needed to be updated, some bug fixes. And this is when we started really thinking about our IIIF manifest generation and trying to work to make that more aligned with best standards and practices in the IIIF community. And so the other big thing here is RAMP. So before this was known as IIIF React Media Player. And now we've renamed it and given it an actual name. So thank you, Emily, for pushing us to that. But now it's called RAMP. And again, this is our library that we're going to start using going forward. And the rename has already happened in the repository. So this lives within Samvera Labs. And everything has been renamed. So it's not IIIF React Media Player anymore. We still have a few sites with that name, but everything will be removed and everything will be updated, and we'll let everyone know. So here's a screenshot of what that looks like. So RAMP is made up of components. So each of these things, the media player, the transcript viewer, and the structural metadata sort of display over on the left there are all separate components, and implementers can add as many of these components to the page that they wish, or they can just put the media player in. And so our goal is to really keep working on this and improve our IIIF interoperability. So that's a big goal for us. We're continuing to work in the IIIF community, and we really want Avalon to not only generate the proper kinds of manifests, but also for our viewer to be able to, represent everything that's within the manifest. And then thinking about how we want to model things going forward. This is a really sort of good thing, and we're enjoying working in this community. It's really good. So, how can we model playlists, collections, further object modeling, different ways we can represent this information in IIIF, and basically make it available for playing in other players and also sort of eating our own dog food, as you could say. Okay. And so following up, so we just released Avalon 7.6, and 7.7 or maybe 8, depending on how it goes, is going to be a big release with a number of different things. So one is we're integrating RAMP within the media player, or within Avalon. So we're replacing the media element JS-based video player with RAMP. We have some performance improvements around the application that we want to target. Adding support for multiple captions per file. That's something that we haven't had, and we're adding support for. And then adding UPI, which is a library for file upload and transfer. So we're thinking of replacing Browse Everything with this sort of sort of broader JavaScript based component to make some of our file uploading a little more abstracted, and so we don't have to keep updating and rewriting adapters. And that's my update. So we would love to talk to you, so please get in touch with us. We've got the public Avalon channel and Samvera Slack, a discussion list, and on our website, we have all the different ways to get in touch with us. All right, thank you.
Thanks, John. I don't see anything in the Q&A. We can go ahead and I'll pass things over to Rebecca for the Hyrax community and Hyrax related interest group update.
Thanks, Heather. Just share my screen here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my slides. So hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Cuddy. I'm the Institutional Repository Librarian at UNC Chapel Hill, and I am also the current Hyrax product owner. My pronouns are she, her. And I just wanted to give a brief update on Hyrax and also the related interest in working groups, the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group and the Hyrax Interest Group, and just tell you about what we've been up to since Connect last year. So in case folks aren't familiar with Hyrax, it is a Ruby on Rails engine built by Samvera. Hyrax provides a foundation for creating many different digital repository applications. So we have been pretty busy in Hyrax land over the past 6 months. So we have one stable release, which is Hyrax 3.5. We have also had 2 release candidates for Hyrax 4. Just a reminder, Hyrax 4 is the version that has upgrades to Blacklight 7, Bootstrap 4, and Rails 6. And also recently, we released a release candidate 2 with Ruby 3.2 support last night. We'll be testing it during the May maintenance working group cycle, so it's still very new, but we're really excited to have that support. Members of the Hyrax maintenance working group participated in the January Developer Congress, where we assessed Hyrax Valkyrization work. We tested Hyrax tickets in the backlog, finalized and posted the Hyrax maintenance policy, fixed some flaky tests, and updated the core components for Ruby and Rails. I would especially like to highlight the Hyrax maintenance policy. This was written by Julie Hardesty, and she also facilitated discussion on this. The policy defines supported versions of Hyrax for maintenance work, and also how we plan to handle new features, bug fixes, security fixes, and dependencies. It's available on the Hyrax documentation page on GitHub, and I'll post a link to that in the Slack once I'm done with my update here. The bulk of our work over the past few months has been to transition Nurax Dev, Nurax PG, and Nurax Stable to Samvera AWS servers. I would just like to extend a huge thanks to DCE for hosting Nurax for so long, and also to Michael Klein for his help in setting up the servers. We have never run Nurax in the cloud prior to this move, so this was just a huge undertaking and a really, really great accomplishment by everyone involved. So the next few months before Connect, we'll be working on several projects. As I mentioned, thanks to the amazing work of Tamsin and Daniel, we released an RC2 of Hyrax 4 last night. So our goal now is to work towards a stable release. And of course, the first step is going to be user testing, which will take place again during the May Hyrax maintenance working group sprint. We'll also be working with the Princeton and Surfliner team towards Valkyrized Hyrax. We are still working out the details, but this work will likely take place later in the summer, and Heather's done a few community communications about this work. And of course, we'll be participating in the May 2023 Developer Congress. So the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group has also been pretty busy, speaking of them. So for those who aren't aware, the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group supports the core maintenance and development for Hyrax. So we fix bugs, we review other issues, we review PRs. We use the Hyrax-WG channel in the Samvera Slack during sprints if you'd like to chat with us. The maintenance working group operates on under a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off sprint cycle. So we just finished a sprint last week. Our next sprint will start on May 15th. And all HYRAX maintenance work is also pledge drive eligible. So if you would like to pledge some hours and put them towards HYRAX, the maintenance working group is a great place to do that. And our sprints are at 1 p.m. Eastern, starting May 15th. So here's a list of all the wonderful people who have participated in HYRAX maintenance working group sprints since the last Connect. We have a core team of Jessica Hilch, Julie Hardesty, Daniel Pierce, and myself. Others are working on a sprint by sprint basis. We greatly appreciate everyone's help and contributions. Even if you only have a little bit of time to devote to HYRAX maintenance, we really appreciate all the time everyone can give. Thanks. The HYRAX interest group. So the HYRAX interest group is the place to learn more about HYRAX and the HYRAX maintenance working group. It's the core leadership and management body for the HYRAX roadmap. So it's the place to go if you would like to discuss something about HYRAX. You can attend our meetings or ask on Slack. Our Slack channel is HYRAX-interest-group. The HYRAX interest group meets on the second Wednesday of the month from 11:30 to noon Eastern, right before the tech call. Our next meeting will be next week on May 10th. That's all I have. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so on Samvera Slack or email me directly. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so we can move to the Haiku community update.
All right, thank you. Does that look right?
Looks great.
Except I'm not at the beginning. All right. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Kevin Kochansky, Client Liaison, SoftServe by Scientist.com. And just going to give you an update on what's going on with Haiku these days. And for those new to the game, because there's always a few people who are like, what's Haiku? What's the difference between Haiku and HYRAX? I can't take the time to answer all that here, but essentially, HYRAX is a Rails gem or a Rails engine that creates a repository. Haiku is a solution based on the HYRAX, and it takes a lot of the components of Samvera and delivers a turnkey repository application. Some general updates going on with Haiku. The current release is 5. We're in the 5s, 0.0.1. This includes a lot of work that came through the Haiku for Consortia project about groups that have roles attached. So there's a list of a lot more granular roles with permissions attached that are now available in Haiku. Analytics, Haiku can now be linked to Google Analytics accounts with exportable reporting on content and usage with a given date range, which is pretty exciting. It features a HYRAX upgrade to not the 4 series yet, but the latest in 3.5.0 from when that work was done. And you can now customize the favicon for your repository in the appearance dashboard. And graph nested indexer. Administrators can now use Solar Graph queries to skip having to do nested indexing. And that speeds up adding and editing items to large collections quite substantially. We are looking to the release of Haiku 6, and this will be a major upgrade for HYRAX 4 series. This includes Blacklight up to 7 and Rails to 6 or 7, whichever makes the most sense at the time. So that's going to be a lot of work. It will also likely include PDF splitting out of the box and serverless IIIF support. Valkyrie, you may have heard and will definitely hear a bit about a community effort to pledge for some sprints related to Valkyrie. Some of these will be funded with money. Some of them will be funded with developer time, and there'll be a lot of information on that in the community, but haiku is going to play a role in this as well as we bring Valkyrie forward. Repo.samvera.org is a haiku repository for the Samvera community, and it'll be kind of the case study for moving a haiku application off of Fedora 4. The Haiku Interest Group, come one, come all. We meet the last Thursday of each month. We get project updates from every pilot project that has exciting things going on. So really important for us to have those conversations and align on what other projects are doing, so we know what should go back into core, so that we can decide what we want to, one project can borrow from another and work in alignment instead of parallel. We give release updates. We also report back on what goes on in the technical calls about haiku. This is much more user-focused call. And everybody's welcome. Drop in and ask questions. Drop in and just listen. Just drop in and have a cup of tea. Projects in development. I'll try to move pretty quickly because there is a lot going on. University of Louisville has been working on their haiku for a while, and they're very excited to say that they'll be relaunching their digital collections on haiku on May 8th with nearly 80,000 items, including images, maps, and newspapers. Ubiquity Press is in the haiku business, and they are onboarding the first 5 tenants from the Empire State Library Network Consortium to their haiku platform. And we are also happy to announce 2 more community members, Danica and Heather, have joined Ubiquity. So we have a Ruby developer and repository account manager. And Heather has been participating in interest group calls. So if you want to meet her, that would be a nice place to stop by and say hi. Amigos Library Services is a not-for-profit, multi-type membership-based organization that's dedicated to serving libraries. They have installed Haiku 5 using Docker on AWS, and they're demonstrating it to libraries interested in piloting consortial institutional repository service. Their next step is to create a more production-ready environment and allow librarians to evaluate the software for themselves. But initial reactions have been really positive. So that's great to hear from another source that's relatively newer to the community that there's good word around haiku. Palni and Palsi with the Haiku for Consortia project continue to be among the leaders in the space. They are running Haiku Commons now, a multi-tenant repository service with 18 tenants in production currently and 48 in pilot or test for their member libraries. This project focuses on community to share expertise and strategy and strategize development, and they use Basecamp to communicate, and they hold monthly user group meetings. They're very organized. Their website, haikuforconsortia.org, is new and improved. It offers a fresh look and highlights their recently released collaborative repository toolkit. That toolkit is a platform-agnostic resource for shared research shared repository services. Includes topics for consideration and examples from their project. They are seeking feedback on that toolkit. So poke around, take a look, and submit your thoughts in the Google form link. Elsewhere, they have completed their second user experience study, and they have completed their second Haiku Commons user satisfaction survey. It's very user-focused, feedback-focused project. They have recently completed a metadata-focused sprint with SoftServe that included new metadata fields, rich text support, a fix to a value order bug, and the ability to upload metadata-only records and improvements to OAI PMH. A little before that, we completed a sprint with them for upgrading and bug resolution. So they've upgraded their Haiku. This included improvements to feature and search collections, batch editing, analytics, appearance settings, homepage redesign, and cross-tenant search. They've got a post that has more information about that. They have a workflow-focused development sprint with SoftServe coming up, and they are looking to plan one for the end of spring for front-end features to be developed in a sprint. They also have further user-focused focus group sessions planned, and a final gap analysis that will be delivered in July as part of the wrap up for the IMLS grant. They are looking ahead to optimize the service model and leverage partnerships for additional feature development. They also want to draw attention to the pledge drive to advance the Haiku and Hyrax Valkyrization project, and they have their own blog about that as well, one of the many places that you'll be able to read a little bit about the goals of that pledge drive. And kind of tangential projects that will be related to Haiku for Consortia and their partners. There are two groups collaborating with Haiku for Consortia in spring and summer of this year. Reshare is a community-based resource sharing platform that's used by consortia for interlibrary loan and will be integrating Haiku as a repository for their controlled digital lending. And University of Pittsburgh is sponsoring a SAML plugin for Haiku using Shibboleth, and also metrics relating to view and downloads that will be exposed by a counter and sushi endpoint in compliance with counter report requirements. There's often talk in the community about counter compliance, and this will be something to move that forward. Adventist Digital Library is continuing migration from their existing Islandora application. It was going to be a 2-tenant instance, but they're in the process of launching a third. So they've got one that features all formats of works, one that is a text database tenant that consists of citations with either attached PDFs or links to remote files. And the new one will be a full repository that will feature all formats of works, but is restricted to local use through Haiku's institution visibility option. They've recently implemented the IIIF print gem with Universal Viewer to deliver PDFs with full text search of OCR pages, and they are still working with SoftServe to optimize PDF splitting and page-by-page processing for that. And for OCR, they're using Tesseract's best vocabulary. Upcoming dev work for the ADL is to explore possibilities of serverless IIIF or potentially move to Cantaloupe Server for image delivery. They are enabling the Universal Viewer with audio and video, and their full text search enhancements will include highlighting search terms that will appear then in the Universal Viewer and reindexing of works that were loaded to the library before the IIIF print gem was installed. Shared research repository from the British Library. Since last Connect, the British Library has a new member of the team. Nora Ramsey is the Assistant Digital Services Specialist, and she joined in February. A number of organizations are keen to join that service when the British Library is prepared and the platform developments have been finalized. Their newest partner is the National Trust, who will be launching their repository and appearing on the search page, the shared search page later this year. Recent and current developments for this shared research repository include XML import and export, which is nearly complete. UV improvements are also finished. That's resulted in a new work type page for page derivatives created by the UV for PDFs and to filter out child pages from the parent record. Plan S work is nearly completed, and Iris UK feed has been implemented for statistics. And University of Tennessee in Knoxville is still in development with SoftServe. They've added a new work with attachment to allow for flexible metadata on the files. In order to accomplish that, we've pulled in a IIIF print gem so that parents show their children in the UV and everything is available in one IIIF manifest. They've added the ability to audio and video to show in Universal Viewer. And Allenson Flex is working on this project for YAML uploads, but the UI is a bit buggy in Haiku. So happy to share notes if anybody wants to reach out and contribute to any work on fixing the Allenson Flex UI in Haiku. They're currently working on migrating the data with plans to go live in December. And just our wrap-up items, finally getting there. We've got a couple of hosted solutions that continue in the community. We have Haiku Up from SoftServe, and we also have the U repositories from Ubiquity Press. And this last busy slide full of information about where you can read about haiku. Certainly join Samvera Slack. I hope everybody here is already on that, but we've got a haiku channel, which is a great place for questions. And there's a small haiku Google group where we share big announcements, though those usually go out at the Samvera level as well. Details again on the interest group and also the developer call. And just want to say thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. There's so much going on with haiku. It's always fun to go to the interest group meeting and see everyone's updates. Really, really exciting. Let's see. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, and I'm not sure that Alex has been able to join us this morning. So why don't we just go ahead? We'll start our break a little early. I can check in with Alex about the Valkyrie update, but we will start our program back up at the top of the hour. Thanks, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. Up next, we have Kate to talk about lessons learned migrating from Universal Viewer 3 to Universal Viewer 4.
Folks, can everyone hear me okay and see my slides okay?
Looks great.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for your time and being here for my talk. Lessons learned migrating from UV3 to UV4. My name is Kate Sewell, and I'm a senior software engineer at softservebyscientist.com. First, I'll talk about how to prepare for the upgrade, then how to do the upgrade, and finally, I'll cover all the things we had to fix to get the upgrade to work. We prepped for this upgrade by first planning how we would make the changes we needed to, and how we would incorporate them into our current implementation. We decided the best course of action was to create a feature branch and do all of our work separate from the main code base until all of the kinks were worked out. I highly recommend this pattern for your upgrade because this process was made easier for us because we were able to contain our messy, broken, partially upgraded code in a testing environment until we were fully prepared to release our upgrade into the wild. The upgrade itself was relatively simple. All we had to do was update the version number of Universal Viewer in the package JSON file, and then run npm install in a running web container. Like most upgrades, the actual upgrade process was quick and easy. Only it's not that easy. This next part is all about the things that we needed to fix before this upgrade made it to production. So not everything broke after the upgrade, but enough did break that it was really great that this was often a feature branch. We were able to thoroughly test our feature branch so that we could triple check that everything that worked in version 3 now works in version 4. Surprise, surprise, it did not. So what we needed to do to fix. So what did we need to do to fix it? And how did we do it? Well, let's dig in. We're going to look at a lot of code. So full text search worked before the upgrade, but after, we couldn't allow a user to navigate through the resource by clicking on the search results like we had previously been able to do. This ended up actually being an issue with the Universal Viewer itself. So one of my teammates put up a PR against UV proper to actually fix the navigation problem. And that's what you're looking at here. And then all we had to do for our code was we upgraded our version to 4.0.0 pre-103 to incorporate the new change, and we were off to the races. Only that wasn't the only thing that broke. So resizing from full screen view didn't work. When you were in UV, it would stay in full screen view despite hitting the resize button. So first we manually fixed this and we added a solution that you're looking at here. We were able to manually get this working on our side again, but as with a lot of open source projects, someone else had this problem too. So we were actually able to bump our version up to 4.0 pre-105, and then we removed our manual fix that you're looking at here. All we needed to do was actually bump up our version, and the new pull of UV had the change that we needed. So one of our custom features was that we would display the full text on the page below the UV box. After the upgrade, we got 2 copies of it. So, not exactly what we were asking for. Luckily, this only took 1 PR to fix, other than the past couple that took at least 2 PRs to fix. But it did cause us to, be really selective about how we're pulling this information into the page and when we're clearing that information out of the page. Another thing that broke, do you have your UV embedded somewhere else? We did, and we ran into a security issue. we weren't able to actually get it to embed. So what you see here on line 74, where we set this configuration of embedded true, by adding that parameter, we were able to allow for the embedding. And this fixed our security issue, and we were able to embed UV in our other site properly without the security issue anymore. Almost there, folks. So after the upgrade, something changed about how UV Universal Viewer 4 included the dependencies. So it wasn't pulling the OpenSeaDragon extensions it needed to work. So we did the simplest thing possible. We simply moved all of the configuration in one place so it could be easily grabbed. So we just moved all of our configuration into our UV config JSON, pulled it out of our UV-Seadragon extension config JSON, and updated our copying of that file in our package JSON file that you can see here in the code. And so by doing that, we were able to grab all the configurations we needed. And I mean, no, we weren't reducing the amount of code, but we were kind of eliminating files, which is generally a good thing. Speaking of removing things, we also found out that Universal Viewer 4 wasn't using formatted locales. So as a cleanup, we simply remove them. I mean, if you don't need it, pull it out. It'll be less confusing for the person who follows after you. So after the upgrade, our link went to the wrong place. So I don't entirely know why the link changed or why we had to reroute it. But after the upgrade, our iframe link was not correct. And so to fix it, we just updated our routes file. It was a little bit hacky. You know, this isn't the cleanest code you're ever going to see, but it did get the job done, and we were able to fix the routing and get it to populate properly. So now that we'd made all these changes, we wanted to make sure that we got Universal Viewer 4, not Universal Viewer 3, the cached configuration. So first we tried changing the cache settings, and that almost worked. But what really worked for us and what we ended up having to do was we had to set a parameter that forced the pull of a new configuration when a new one was available. So basically what's happening here is it's looking for the version number, and if the version number doesn't match what's on the page, then it's going to grab a new configuration. And this is a really old version. As you can see, that's like 1 point something. It's pretty arbitrary. As long as it's much lower than the version you're close to, you will be fine. But we had to do this because just the caching settings we set weren't enough to make sure that we got a fresh pull of UV4 when we loaded our website. Okay, so for a fully comprehensive list of what we had to change to make UV4 work for us is captured in this giant PR. It has 58 pages of changes, but most of it is getting rid of files we no longer need. So I hope this primer helps you on your journey of upgrading Universal Viewer. What you need to fix in your app will most likely be different in some way, but I hope that what we went through will help you find your way. So in summary, I'd like to suggest that you plan how you'll integrate your changes. I wish you so much luck during the actual upgrade process. That should be pretty easy, hopefully. And my final advice is test thoroughly before you let that code out into the wild. Thank you so much for your time. We have a little bit of time for Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Kate. That was excellent. I know there are several people who are looking forward to hearing what you had to say about this process. So I'll give it a minute for any questions in the Q&A or in the Connect channel in Slack.
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on Slack or send me an email, my scientist email. I'm happy to talk about this. I know I just showed you a bunch of code and what you run into with UV may be just slightly different for your configuration. So I'm happy to chit chat about this and hopefully get you past whatever blockers you're working on to get to UV4 because there's some cool new features. So, all right. Well, thank you so much.
All right, excellent. Well, next up we have an update from our Outreach and Engagement Working Group. So we've got Chris and Adam.
Right, just share my screen. Okay, I'm hoping that that is visible to everyone.
Looks great.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you very much then. So a brief update from the Samvera Outreach and Engagement Working Group. Firstly, to record, I suppose, the name, which I've forgotten to change on that slide. That's not very good, is it? So we were the Samvera Marketing Working Group, and that just reinforces it. And then in the autumn of last year, we did a review of our role, our charter, our understanding of what the group was there to do, and recognized that the origins of the group, which was formed where in the year that we migrated from being Hydra to Samvera, were perhaps no longer strictly as what they used to be when we started that process back then. In that stage, it was very much about going out there, telling everyone that Hydra was now Samvera. And everyone needs to take on board what Samvera is, and that Samvera is the same as what Hydra was in terms of their understanding. Looking at how other groups have carried out this work over time, other open source communities, other open source projects, we noted far more of an emphasis on outreach and engagement in more recent years, and hence we decided to change the name of the group to that, and that's why. Hence the update from that group. Now, having said that, much of what we do has carried on as before, and we have a regular meeting on Wednesdays every other week at 11:30 Eastern time, and we also have a Slack channel that you can use in order to contact us. Although I'm realizing I really should have updated this rather more. I'll make sure it is for the shared slides. I'd like to say thank you very much to all the members of the group who meet and help keep this conversation going. In particular, we did re-release our charter when we did change our name just before Christmas, and that led to some new engagement from Kevin, Kirsten, and Molly, and we're very grateful to have them on board in terms of the discussions going forward. And I would also want to encourage everyone who is interested in how we can talk about Samvera, how we can go out and engage others with Samvera. Please come along, drop in and share your ideas and thoughts because they'd be great to hear. In terms of the activity, so as I said, refresh the group's charter and the name, focus on outreach and engagement rather than marketing per se. That's not to say we won't do marketing, but it's just to reshape the emphasis of what we're focusing on doing in terms of reaching out to all the different communities within the Samvera community in order to ensure that they feel part of the community, but also reaching out to those people outside the Samvera community to help them understand what Samvera is doing as a community itself. And then engaging with them in a way that is appropriate and helpful to them in the way that we can engage with them. Welcome to new members. And I'd say one of the key areas that's been beneficial in having new members come and join us is that it's highlighted that there are particular activities, projects, and work out there within the Samvera community, which is very much about outreach and engagement, because individual projects have needed to engage with their user communities. And there's much that we can learn from these different experiences of what it's meant to go out and talk to different groups about what Samvera is, what Samvera can bring to them, and how it can help them in whatever they do. So the more we can share, brilliant, and do that through this working group. There's various ways we can do that. So over the years, we've shared presentations. We have the repo.samvera.org, which was referenced earlier, as being a repository of all the presentations we give at events such as this one, which is a fantastic resource. One of the discussions we've had recently, which we're looking to see whether there's how we can develop further, is that one of the collections in the repository is Samvera in print. And this is where there have been a few journal articles written or a book chapter about Samvera or referencing Samvera. There's not much in that collection, and we'd very much like to hear about any journal articles or book chapters or other literature that you may have written that references or talks about Samvera, and to have it added to that collection. People can add items to the collection themselves, so it'd be great if you could go ahead and just do that. Or if not, then do share it through our Slack channel or with the group, and we'll happily look to build it up or add it to that collection. Equally, and this was sparked by a conversation recently by an invitation to contribute to an open access book about open access communities, there may be opportunities out there for us to engage in writing journal articles or book chapters about Samvera, in order to record it and actually reach different audiences and broader audiences. And therefore, if such opportunities arise, then it'd be great to share them and work together on what we can contribute towards these publications. The other activity which has been undertaking over the course of the year has been to revisit and take a fresh look at the Samvera motto. So we have a Samvera motto. It's there at the bottom of the Samvera slide deck template. If you want to go far, go together. We've had it from the very early days of the Hydra project. It's served us incredibly well, and we need to continue using it where it is of use to us. But again, in part of sort of reflecting where we were as a community now, we thought it would be useful to at least revisit whether there was particular drivers or key messages that it might be quite nice to reflect in a motto, which we could use alongside the existing one, or instead of. Again, this comes down to the communication and the engagement that you're looking to carry out, who you're trying to communicate to, and what they would like to hear in terms of what Samvera can offer them. Essentially, how can we go further together by trying to revisit the messages and the drivers that we would like to put out there to various communities. So the partner community was fantastic in providing us with a whole heap of input at the partner meeting that took place in March. And those options are currently being reviewed and will be shared in due course in order to decide whether or not there's any particular motto within there that we would be great for the community to take on board and make use of. So thank you very much for all the input that's been received. It was fantastic. It really sparked off some interesting ideas about what we are trying to portray and how we could do that best. And we'll see where it takes us. Moving on, there's also been a lot of work done on the Samvera website over the last few months, and I'm going to hand over to Adam, who's been doing a lot of that work and also has a nice video that describes what has been undertaken. So I will stop my share so Adam can share his.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Arling. I'm a developer at Northwestern University Libraries. And yeah, I prepared a little video that I hope kind of show some of the behind the scenes, the transition to a new home for the Samvera website. Let me find it here. Make sure I have audio. Show computer sound. I'm going to play this. If for some reason you can't hear the audio in the video, if someone could give a shout out, I'd appreciate it. Here we go. So I'll start with that brief overview of what this is all about. Made a decision to migrate from a WordPress hosted site to a new web application, static site, which gives more control over future design and features. we have decided upon Next.js, a popular JavaScript framework for building apps and also static sites. For CSS styling, we use Tailwind CSS as a package for help in being able to inline and get quick visual feedback on CSS updates. Next.js is full stack, which runs Node.js on the server side and uses React components client side. The server side features allows user Next to do things like write, content in Markdown or build APIs as part of the framework. But ideally, we wanted to end up with a static site updatable by anyone who's comfortable using GitHub. So over the course of the last year, we built the new site in the GitHub Samvera org space, and feel free to give it a once over and let us know your thoughts. This wasn't a redesign of the samvera.org website, but rather just recreates the previous WordPress theme styles through new CSS, and end users should expect the same functionality on the website as before. So how does one use and update the app? We envisioned two main user groups for the new web application: content managers and developers. Content managers will interact almost exclusively with Markdown files, which are located in the Markdown directory. The file and folder organization in the Markdown directory gets recreated in the app's primary navigation bar when that builds. So if you create a new file or update, it will be reflected in the primary navigation automatically when the app builds. Each Markdown file uses front matter as a convention to give page info, like the title, date of the post or page. We provided some helpful screenshots in the README, which hopefully gives some extra pointers and tips. A content manager can make updates in one of two ways. If you have a code editor you're comfortable with, you can update a file directly, an ID like VS Code, or alternatively, and maybe more simply, a content manager can make updates directly to the file in a web browser at the repository home in GitHub. So here we could update the same FAQ page, create a new branch, give it a title, create a pull request. We could do this all in one place within GitHub's web page UI. If we look back to the README, there's some screenshots and hopefully helpful instructions which detail this process. When a pull request is merged into the main branch, a few things happen. We have GitHub Actions set up to first build the app and all the new assets. A static version of the website is created. And then finally, we synced GitHub pages so that a site can be hosted on GitHub in its home repository. So next we'll look at this app through the eyes of a developer and how they might make updates, bug fixes, etc. The first step is to clone the GitHub repository on your local dev machine and install the project dependencies. Then we'll spin up a local running version of the app that we can develop against. And a developer could make the same content updates a content manager might make, but most likely a developer would be working on React component code or code which runs in the server environment. For our static site, the server-side code is only executed during the build process, and there's not like a live server environment. Everything is currently set up to handle dynamic routing in the application to allow for flexibility in adding and removing pages. The general workflow when the app builds is that the app reads the Markdown directory, gets the information architecture, and then dynamically constructs static pages, child pages, and injects Markdown content into each statically generated page. And that's pretty much it. This is just a starting point. We figured an app like this is a nice way to showcase, maybe alternative standard Samvera code bases. Maybe newcomers might be interested in JavaScript solutions, or perhaps one of you out there could use something like this for an internal project which lets Markdown drive a website that has a lot of flexibility on where it might eventually live. So any questions, comments, concerns, please let us know. There's some new features we'll be adding in the next few months. So if anyone's curious to pair or learn more, feel free to contact myself or Heather. Thanks. Bye. Yeah, so there it is. Kind of got out of giving a presentation, but I think yeah, Heather mentioned she has some ideas in the future about how we can like take this base level, I guess, new app and maybe build some new features on top of it. So I'll probably be part of that. So if anyone's curious or interested, yeah, get in touch. Thank you.
And can I say a big thank you to Adam for all the work he's done for bringing this about. It's been fantastic to have that transition undertaken and see it in practice. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you both. Yes, thank you, Adam. I can say it's already much easier to create blog posts for our site, and we've got lots of ideas in the working group. So do please join us, take a look, get in touch with Adam, because we will be adding some additional pages and looking at our subdomains and things like that over the summer. So thank you both for the update. And I apologize I got us out of order. It's completely my fault. Our next presenter is Matt Jordan to talk about digital humanities exhibition sites using IIIF collections and Canopy IIIF.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, I'm Matt Jordan, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'm a developer at Northwestern University Libraries. This presentation is in part about an application called Canopy IIIF, but it's also about an idea that I've been sitting with for about 2 years now, and that is can the IIIF presentation API serve as a data model to generate a static site from. I'm going to walk you through that. Or more specifically on the question, can a IIIF collection serve as that source? And Canopy is a tool that will take that IIIF collection and it'll basically build out an entire Next.js instance, sort of similar to what Adam was just showing you. And it's just going to do it in a few steps. And it's essentially somewhat a collection viewer, but it's also a fully functioning website. And I opted for Next.js because I do a lot of JavaScript development and React development, but this idea doesn't necessarily need to be fixed to that domain. Just so happens that Canopy IIIF is. Some use cases for it include maybe extending existing collections in a repository for digital exhibitions. It could be that maybe you are a researcher or on a research project that needs to curate a IIIF collection from manifests from multiple institutions, house them in one spot, and then talk about those manifests. Or it could serve as an entire digital collections front end for some sort of smaller institution, thinking like a smaller college or public library that has its own distinctive collections that it wants to serve up to the public. The limit of that could be somewhere around 5,000. I haven't really tested beyond that, meaning 5,000 objects, but I think this really would just be dependent on the build time of Canopy. So there are many other solutions for digital exhibits projects out there. On the more minimal side, you have frameworks like Collection Builder, which is built by the University of Idaho, and Wax, built by Mari in Europe, which are built from easy to construct and manage CSVs and files, and they generate static instances. Wax itself also stands up its own internal IIIF image API. There's, of course, Spotlight, which is a Blacklight plugin. There's Omeka S, which is sort of a PHP MySQL CMS and framework for managing multiple exhibits under one stack. And of course, you have like your various Drupal and WordPress instances extending off of university managed infrastructure. I think we've all seen those. And then there's Canopy, which I think can be classified alongside these, but really what makes it different from the rest is that it will use the IIIF presentation API as that data model, and it'll reference those resources in place. So it's not actually ingesting a bunch of images into it. It's saying, hey, these images exist elsewhere, and these manifests exist elsewhere, and we're just going to take that data and render it into a static site. So I'm relatively new at Northwestern. I started about a year and a half ago, and in a former role at the University of Tennessee, I worked under Emily Gore, who was my assistant dean. She's now at Georgia now, and Mark Baggett, who is the head of digital initiatives. And in planning sessions heading into 2021, we sort of geared up for some ambitious IIIF focused initiatives. Much of our thinking and our IIIF strategy stemmed from a presentation that was given by Maria Matienzo and Esme Cowles at the CNI Fall 2020 virtual membership meeting. This presentation was called "A Tree's Strength is Its Trunk, IIIF as Central Operational Infrastructure," and it outlined the foundations for our strategy, which would be one where our DH projects and exhibits would not be disparate projects with manifests sprinkled about it, but rather we hope that it would be rooted to a tenet of having these new projects being branches extending from some sort of robust IIIF infrastructure. This premise became known to us in short as IIIF as a trunk. So the first step was that we needed to produce IIIF manifest for all of our objects in the repository. I think at this point in time, we did not have that. And we also needed to build DH and digital exhibit instances that extended some of these collections and that consumed manifests that were delivered from our new IIIF APIs. And at this point in time, as I entered step 2, my thought was that our exhibits would contain some curated references to the manifests, and that we would want to bring those in IIIF viewers. But I knew this would take a lot of manual work. And so I was walking down the hallway with Mark and probably drinking coffee. And I asked Mark, what if our new boutique DH sites were actually sourced from a IIIF collection? And this is when we found the Canopy to our trunk. And that original Canopy project, some of you may know of it, it's called Rising from the Ashes. It's an oral history project. It was built using Gatsby.js. It was sourced from a IIIF collection. However, it wasn't really developed for reuse. And this led, basically what I mean by that is that it couldn't be reused with other IIIF collections very easily. There was a lot of hard-coded references to the Rising from the Ashes collection, and it just led to a decline in the code base health to an extent where it was just like it needed to be refactored if it was ever going to be used for a different collection altogether. And it was around this time when this launched in late 2021, the previous project, the Gatsby project launched in 2021, that I started to think about building a new version of Canopy. I had just moved to Northwestern, and I sort of opted to switch over from Gatsby to Next.js for a slightly slimmer build. But really the main focus of this new project was that I wanted to make sure that it could be used with any IIIF collection, both presentation 2 and 3. And if I wanted to make sure that if you had a collection with 50 manifests, those 50 manifests would be represented by 50 pages with real URLs. I wanted to make sure that the label and the summary and the metadata properties that were from those manifests would sort of stitch together to create some sort of search index where those 50 pages could now be potential results. I wanted a user to be able to say, these metadata labels would become my facets in my new website. And I wanted a researcher or some sort of digital humanities focused individual to be able to use Markdown to sort of leverage those manifests in the collection and sort of talk about these manifests in a certain way. And I'll demo that more in a bit. In addition to that, I wanted to sort of think of this as a triple IF product in some sort of way. And so maybe Canopy could also extend out other parts of the specification, triple IF specifications, things like the nav place extension to be able to place manifests on a map. Potentially in the future, things like the nav date extension to be able to place manifests in some sort of temporal dimension, so a timeline component of some sort. And then also the I in triple IF, one of the I's stands for international. So I wanted to make sure that Canopy could support other languages. Before getting further into Canopy's features, so I want to provide a brief update on what a triple IF collection is and what it can be. So a triple IF collection is specified alongside a manifest as a resource type in the presentation API. Similar to a manifest, a collection has its own dereferenceable URI, and that would act as its ID. And inside that collection, there's an items array. And that array can contain entries to other items, which can both be manifests and collections. Canopy currently only supports collections of manifests, but I do hope that maybe at some point, collections of collections can be supported as well. Each entry with those items should be very minimal as far as the properties that are used to describe them. It should not be a fully embedded manifest. Things like label, summary, thumbnail, and maybe very minimal metadata. One more point, collections aren't necessarily fixed to a single named collection. They can be, but they could also be a set of search results, or even, as I mentioned earlier, a curated list of manifests from multiple institutions. A quick rundown of the Canopy build process. So the first thing that Canopy does is it'll go out and it'll fetch that triple IF collection. And then it'll decide whether or not it needs to upgrade that from a version 2 collection to a version 3 collection. Then it will go into that collection and start running through all the manifests inside that collection. It'll decide whether or not it needs to upgrade those manifests. And then it's going to collect the label, the summary, the metadata, and the thumbnail from those manifests. And we're going to store those for later use in building out a search index and some other little helpers that sort of build the static site itself. We're also going to assign slugs for the manifests that are going to be represented as pages in the site. So these would be like unique URLs. And then, as I mentioned, we just store that for later for the actual build of Next.js. Demo here. So this collection here, this collection here at Tennessee is called Heilman. It has about 1,120 objects in it. And it's also represented by this triple IF collection with 1,120 manifests. This manifest itself has an ID at the very top. You can sort of see that. And then also each one of the manifests have their own IDs as well. So I'm going to go over to my code here, and I'm going to create a canopy.json file. This will serve as basically the build file for this Canopy instance. It's going to look very similar to this sample file that you're seeing right here. And I have a pre-made config that I'm going to paste in. But essentially, it is just 3 properties. It's a collection, which is that URI to that collection on the right side of the screen there. There is a featured array, which is all the different manifests that I want to feature from my collection. These are the IDs to those manifests. And there's a metadata array. This is an array of different metadata labels that I want to target to be used as my facets in my Canopy instance. There's also a dev dev property here as well to define if I want the dev and production properties to be different. And I go over to my terminal, I'm going to type npm run dev, and it's going to just start cycling through that collection. And you can sort of see it working right here. This takes about 20 seconds. It's going to go through all 1120 of those in chunks of 10 at a time. And so right now we're hitting this URI, or digitallib.utk.edu, and now it is built. And I'm going to copy and paste localhost 5001 over into my browser. And I now have a fully functioning Canopy instance built using only that IIIF collection. So more about the search API routes that are generated on build. Creating a simple and performant search index is an important part about the Canopy build process. Canopy uses Flex Search to handle this, opting towards this as sort of an in-memory solution that it works very well for quick responses. And upon a user searching in the user interface of Canopy, the request is made to an internal API route that returns back a set of search results as a IIIF collection, which are rendered to the screen. Certain facet API routes are also in here as well. Now, the facet API routes differ from the search routes as they are an exact match on the metadata in the manifests. And those are also returned as IIIF collections on the search pages. So back to our Heilman example here. At the top, you'll see the featured manifest that we had brought, or that we had set in our configuration. And then down below, you'll see a bunch of highlighted works. These sliders are sort of rendered from the curated set of metadata labels. If I go up to the search box and type maple, I'm going to come to the search results page where I have 93 results for Japanese maples and various other maples, I guess. You see a sort of a continuously scrolling grid here. If I click on one item, I'm going to come to a work page that represents a single manifest. This work page has a IIIF viewer. This is our Clover viewer, which is in Samvera Labs. If I scroll down below here, I sort of see all the metadata that is coming from the manifest rendered out. And I also see the faceted metadata available as links. If I were to click on one of those, which I just did, now I'm brought over back to the search page where I see the 46 results for the faceted subject that we have here. There's other ways that you can customize a Canopy instance. For instance, you can customize the navigation pretty easily by editing some very basic JSON files. Mentioned earlier, you can feature manifests. Any manifest that is in the collection can be featured. You can also customize the Flex Search configuration if for any reason you wanted to change the weighting of a label or a summary or metadata values. There's different locales that are available in a Canopy instance. Currently, only English and various flavors of Norwegian are supported, but we are open for PRs to add new languages as well. And then finally, this is where sort of the power of using something like Next.js comes in, is that you can add contextual content using Markdown. So Canopy uses something called MDX, which allows you to use Markdown and JSX alongside each other. Essentially, this means that you can import a React component from Canopy's embed library and insert it anywhere within your content. So I'm going to take advantage of that and render a viewer here between paragraphs. This viewer has an API route for facet subject buds. It's going to render a IIIF collection and then in the viewer here. And then if I were to copy this and put it down below again, maybe I'm going to update the route here to be date and undated. That viewer now is going to render down below in between this paragraph and that block quote. But you can use other components as well. So there's a slider component that is rendered on the home page. I'm going to import that in here and change this viewer down below to use the slider component instead of the viewer component. And this is where using IIIF as a data model really allows us to reuse existing componentry very easily. And using MDX allows us to intermix components with markdown content. So there's still a lot of work to do to refine how Canopy can exist in the future. I'm looking into documenting how you can import and use Mirador, Universal Viewer, or even RAMP, which you saw and heard about earlier. And I would be interested in developing also a fully static option. This would have to exclude the internal API routes and use a static search index from file, but it's very possible. Also supporting collections of collections, the timeline, and etc. Appreciate the time, and please visit the repository and explore how Canopy can be used. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. That was really, really cool. Thank you. Looks like there's some good conversation in the Connect Slack. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. But thank you again.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got James Griffin to talk about component maintenance.
Everyone, sorry, just please, everyone note that the slides are available and linked in the wiki. Good day, everyone. My name is James Griffin. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am currently serving as the facilitator for the Component Maintenance Interest Group. These will be a brief series. I apologize. This will be a brief series of updates for where things stand within the community. For those who are interested in getting into contact regarding component maintenance for Ruby gems, one is welcome to directly contact me on Slack. There's also a dedicated Slack channel for addressing component maintenance, and there's currently a component maintenance interest group wiki page. There are no formal members for the interest group. There was a call for participation on Samvera Tech, and should anyone remain interested and available, we always welcome any form of engagement on any level, even just questions or registration of issues is always extremely valuable to everyone in the community. Reviewing engagement throughout autumn of 2022, there has been a call for the deprecation of Ruby components in November. This was posted on the Samvera Tech mailing list. And following this in December, there were also a number of individuals who have volunteered to serve as component product owners. Thank you very much. There is also general interest after engaging with the community in integrating a number of disparate Ruby gems within the GitHub Samvera organization. There are a number of different Ruby gems that basically require quite a bit of overhead in terms of maintenance. And ideally, integrating gems such as Bixby, which is used for style guideline enforcement and for linting of source code files. I'm trying to integrate that into a larger repository while maintaining the current workflow for publishing the gems might be easier and more straightforward when it comes to maintaining the actual repositories on the GitHub organization. I think the site here, the long-term goal is to ensure that administrative overhead is reduced and there's less of a need to try and map a one GitHub repository to one single person. There have also been a number of discussions that are still ongoing within the robot alignments group. Thank you very much, everyone who has led those and who has engaged. And I cannot emphasize how grateful I am for Hyrax developers and community Samvera developers, everyone who has engaged with me and the group, even though they haven't formally been members, Chris Kovar, Daniel Pierce, Jonathan Broshkind, Alexandra Don, Tamsin Johnson, and of course to everyone who has volunteered as a Samvera product owner. Thank you again. It's all greatly appreciated. So for the summer of 2023, the hope for engagement is that I'm going to look to try and propose a set of weekly office hours. Believe that I have a set number of hours that I can pledge. But just ensuring that there's general availability for pairing, just allocating time also to ensure that I can look to undertake maintenance tasks. Also ensure that this time can be used for onboarding and just general, increasing inclusivity and things of this nature for individuals who might be looking for smaller tasks to undertake as new developers to the community. Also, I would like to try on a more conceptual level, try to engage more with the community and see about reevaluating priorities and objectives. Right now, there's really the concept of a component has been extremely valuable, but I'd be curious to know, as I'm seeing more and more JavaScript projects, I've been seeing serverless projects within the Samvera GitHub organization. Should core components remain tightly coupled to Ruby, or perhaps exploring widening or broadening the definition of component to maybe encompass Samvera gems, Samvera packages, Samvera images, and things of this nature. Perhaps that's something that could be readily evaluated. And in that sense, we can also try to align our priorities with those undertaking work in JavaScript. In addition to this, trying to also allocate time for documentation cleaning and just general updates. And also raising the possibility of automated security audits. I know of two services, Sneak and GitHub CodeQL. I believe that both of these have a free tier of service, and included within this is an automated set of features that can readily identify vulnerabilities introduced by just say pinning to an unsupported release of a gem, or in the case of JavaScript projects, a package release. So these are the updates that I currently have. When it comes to communication, please all contact is welcome on either the Samvera Slack channel. The tech mailing list is also available. And of course, by all means, please, you can readily identify me. Contact me on Slack via direct message. And I'd be happy to work with you and try to address any and all current needs. Thank you very much for your attention, time, and patience, everyone.
Thanks, James. We've got a question in the Q&A. Have any Samvera components / gems been depreciated already through the recent process?
Formally, no. I believe there's still I believe every single gem that was in question actually that actually isn't going to be deprecated. I don't believe that there's going to be too many deprecations regarding the essentials like IIIF manifests and things like this. So fortunately, we do have product owners identified.
Excellent. Yeah, there are some questions about that in the Slack chat as well. Thank you. Thanks for all those updates.
Thank you again.
I don't see any other Q&A. Our next update is from the bulk rack interest group, and I have Braden listed as the updater for that.
Hey everyone, yeah, I'm just trying to share my screen here. Just it doesn't like that I'm full screen. Okay, interesting. my apologies. It really doesn't like that I have multiple monitors going on. So, alrighty, I'm just going to share this screen and then hopefully, okay. Can you all see my presentation then? Yeah.
Yep, I see it.
Yep. Excellent. Good. All right. Perfect. Sorry for the confusion there. Yeah, my name is Braden. I work at SoftServe by Scientist, and I'm here to give you just an update on the bulk racks interest group and what's been going on in bulk racks lately. Yeah, so let's get started off. First big thing that has changed recently, or since the last Virtual Connect, was relationships. Relationships are run now in a separate job. The jobs can all be run in parallel, and they run after the initial import has completed. They're scheduled to wait until they see all the importer jobs finish and check for that, and then run the relationships job. As the importers run through and import the works, we create a pending relationships object that records all the relevant information about the relationship, including the child order, which I know was a bit of an issue, because if you have a CSV and you have your work and your order of pages for like a book, say, you obviously want them to import in the correct order, and sometimes with things running in parallel, they will they'll import in the wrong order. So we've actually set it up so that it records the order and it will import in the correct order for you, so that you don't have any issue with pages getting swapped. And then we also created a service to remove the relationships for dev testing. So if you've got a dev environment and you want to test relationships on, you can then remove them and retest the relationships. Yeah. Ooh, okay. There we go. Export changes. We've now moved to using what we call a parser export record set for exports. And this is a single set that will gather all the entries from Solr and set them all up, or gather the info from Solr, set up all the entries for export, and it can be used for all the exporter formats that we have, at least built into bulk racks. And the exports can now be larger. They're not limited by the Solr query size. We did this so that it kind of reduces duplication of code across all the different parsers. So now all the export code is in one parser. The other benefit is you're not looking through all these different locations for export code. You know, is it in this part of the model? Is it in this part of the parser? All the main export stuff is handled in the parser export record set to gather up those entries. So you get just a set return from that service, and you can go ahead and export from there. So that should hopefully simplify things for people who are developing in bulk racks. And yeah, so we hope that that makes things easier for y'all. Some of the new features is, I'm not sure if this was part of the last Virtual Connect update, but you can import file set metadata now if you have set that up in your Hyrax or Haiku instance. So you can actually include file sets as a line on a CSV, and they'll import and be connected via the relationships. They can have metadata so that you can set titles, as well as any other metadata you've added onto the file set. So if you want creators or anything like that, you can add that onto the file set, and you can include that in your CSV, and it will import that for you. Collections and file sets can now be deleted via the CSV. Since you can put them on separate lines and import them with metadata, you can also delete them in the same way that you would delete a work. There's better error messages now and improved parser testing, so that hopefully things will run smoother for everyone who's got bulk racks installed and have a better idea of what's going on wrong if something goes wrong. But hopefully with the improved parser testing that came with the that export parser set and everything, there will be less issues overall for everyone. So I'm very excited about that. There's on the importer show page for a specific importer, there's actually separate tabs for the works, file sets, and collections, because they can all be imported with metadata. They all create their own entries and everything in bulk racks. So they're all separated out there. So if one thing fails, you can actually see, oh, it's the file set that failed on that. Oh, I forgot to include the file, and that's why. And it doesn't make your entire work fail. It's just the single file set. So you can correct that one thing. Baggett code was rewritten and runs smoother, which is nice. So it should collect things and create bags a lot quicker and easier for you. And the export downloads can now be split by size. This was definitely a very requested feature because of the fact that some people were trying to do exports of 20 gigs with all the files and everything, and creating a zip of that size and trying to pass that through the browser is not the easiest thing, does not work very smoothly. So we've set it up so the downloads can be split by size. So they'll actually provide you with multiple zips split up, so you can go ahead and download the multiple zips and get all your stuff and not have to worry about a massive file being created there. It's now possible to create customized permissions to access BulkRacks UI. So you can specify whether or not someone has the ability to create importers or create exporters, or run importers or run exporters. And that is just 2 lines in your ability file, or two methods in your ability file that you can add as part of the upgrade notes for BulkRacks. And that will sort of allow you a bit more fine-tuned control over who can do what in BulkRacks. We're also we also now account for more like common mistakes when it comes to importing QA fields. So for something like write statements, if you're using HTTP or HTTPS, it will detect that, and it looks at things like trailing slashes and corrects for that. So that less errors when you actually get the work imported and the QA field doesn't quite match, just slightly off of what's in the QA YAML, it should correct for that now. And then the last thing here on my agenda is the customizable object factory, works list, file set class, and relationship job variables. So what we've done is we've set it up so that in your initializer, you can specify what the module name is for each one of those things. They default to their, original defaults that were in BulkRacks. But if you want to use BulkRacks in a situation where you want to write a new object factory, or you aren't wanting to use the hierarchs.config.curation concerns work list, you want to specify your own work list, you have a different type of file set class, or you want to build your own relationships jobs because your relationships are more complex than standard relationships, then you can actually do that, and you can set all the module names in your BulkRacks initializer, and then just add those files, those custom files, to your app, and it will automatically pull in the correct files for you and run your object factory or your works list or your relationships jobs. So yeah, that's it for me. Does anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Brayden. It's exciting. I don't see anything in the Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you for the update.
Perfect. Yeah. And if anyone has any other questions in the future for me, I am in the Samvera Slack, and you can definitely post them in the BulkRacks channel there, and I will likely see them.
All right, I'm going to hand it over now to Brian McBride for an update from the Research Data Working Group.
Thank you, Heather. Just share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
Perfect. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Just here to give an update on the Samvera Research Data Working Group and the work that the group has done over the past while. The group was chartered last year we're trying to evaluate 4 core focuses: gather environmental information regarding who's using Samvera software in the community and outside the community, Document community interest in research data repository features, document the current state of Samvera software for research data purposes, and capture existing and possible future use cases. So we drafted a survey. It was set up in 3 stages. There was a survey that was specifically targeted for Samvera community members who utilize Samvera software already and have used the Samvera stack for research data purposes. And there was also one that was for those either in the community or outside the community who are aware of Samvera and chose to use a different product other than the Samvera stack. And then the third group was anyone who's currently looking for research data repository services or applications and what it is that they're looking for and how they're evaluating that. So we put the survey together and we distributed it to this, so the community list, data curation network, the Google group for data cure, code for lib, Blacklight, and a few other groups. So we got a fair number of responses. There was over 60 responses, which we thought was pretty good. So 11 of those responses did not currently provide data repository services. 22 were using a product other than the Samvera to provide the research data repository services. 14, however, were using a Samvera-based application for repository data services. There was some duplicate information or incomplete, and we did receive 16 responses from Samvera partners. So just to start off, why organizations did not choose Samvera. One of the things that we heard, there was a common theme, was extensive development work was required to support the Samvera stack in terms of supporting research data needs compared to other services like Dataverse and DSpace. There was the lack of in-house capacity to migrate and support the Samvera product. And sort of the challenges that I think we all see is retaining and recruiting software developers. So that was one thing, I was trying to recruit developers who are work with Samvera. And a few other things just to continue on that was handling larger data deposits. We heard a lot of feedback from that. Lack of metadata schema for describing research data, lack of in-app curation features, and support for bulk upload for research data sets. So we saw some of these themes. And the other thing what we noticed is that there's this impression that the applications don't do certain things when in fact they actually do. So something we need to talk about as a community. Some of the concerns, community level concerns, research data has never really been a core use case for Samvera compared to other applications. The pending support for Valkyrie and Hyrax, that was mentioned as a big thing because I know a lot of us are very hopeful for the completion of the integration of Valkyrie and Hyrax. And then there was this other comment, lack of dominant institutions. Samvera is both a benefit, but it is potentially a liability if there's a single entity moving the community forward. And as we like to say, we try to move together. So on to the good things, but Samvera was chosen, open source and community supported. I think that's a really important thing to note, is a lot of the reasons folks chose Samvera is for the community and the applications. There's autonomy and flexibility to develop and tailor to local needs. I know a lot of institutions have built specific functionality on top of Hyrax for the research data needs. Samvera compared favorably compared to other open source solutions. And there was also familiarity with the Samvera stack and the code base. And this was some of the features. What features are missing from the Samvera applications? Ability to upload and preserve the hierarchy of research data and complex files organization. That was mentioned quite a few times. Improve metadata and support integration of external identifiers, including ORCID, DOI, ROR, and grant IDs. Support for larger data sets, deposit level usage stats, peer review management, including option to receive feedback and queries via the application. Things just continued versioning capability for collections requiring any additions or revisions after publication, and support for automatically generated citations, and better browsing options for the data sets. With that, I just want to extend my gratitude and thanks to everyone who served on the committee over the past few months. The final report will be done by the end of this month. I promise that. So we have one more meeting that we'll get on the books, and we'll publish the report that includes a lot more data than I was able to put into this short presentation. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me either on Slack or my email. And yeah, if there's any questions, let me know.
Thanks, Brian. That's great. We're running right at time. So I'll go ahead and hand things over to Jeremy for our last presentation of the day to close us out.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Oh, boy. I get this Zoom thing. So you should be seeing a very boring slide. These are the tools I know. My name is Jeremy Friesen. I use pronouns he, him. I work at Software Services by Scientist.com. I am a senior lead engineer on that team, and I'm also a board member for Samvera. And bear with me, I'm going to walk through quite a lot of technical stuff, but I'll make this stuff available afterwards. So in this presentation, it started out as a workshop for RailsConf 2023, and I pivoted away from the content, but I had a lot of this already created. So I thought, let me share this in a format that is much more presentation oriented. We'll walk through Shell, Ruby, and my text editor. I keep losing focus on this. So a little wayfinding. I've enabled some key bindings at the bottom so you can see what I'm typing. Throughout this, we're going to see two chunks of blocks, bash, and margin notes. The margin notes are if I were kind of chattering in Slack myself. All right, section one shell of a game. We're going to go over these 5 things. I do have some more, but for time's sake, we're going to cut real quick. So tree. So this is a command that can give you some insight into the structure of your directory. And I'll give you just a quick example, and I'll show you another use case later. But I run this in my editor, and it kicks out a little ASCII tree of the directories that are in this repository. Next up, we have rip grep. Grep is dead. I encourage you to look at either this or the Silver Searcher, sometimes called AG. This one I use all the time, every day. It's actually baked into my editor for ridiculously fast searching and very powerful searching. So I'm going to show a couple of examples. First, due to the nature of my work, I work on lots of projects across different clients, and sometimes it's really important for me to know the context of what are the gems that we're using. So I have this little rip grep script that I run, and it just says the British Library currently uses these gem versions. It's a quick way for me to orient, to go over to the repositories on my machine, check them out so I can kind of get a sense of what's what. Another one, this is just a little fun thing. It shows a couple of different ways to do commands. It introduces the substitution and for no purpose, because I ultimately sort them, pipe them into unique, and then count the number of words. So my editor, I have 152 packages that I've declared as important for the work I do. Carefully curated, much like, I don't know, a basket of flowers. Next up, I have this script to highlight how preposterously fast ripgrep is. What this is doing is it is querying all the repositories that I have on my machine and looking for this term. I'll just run it, count to about 1, and it shows these are where all the files that have a hit on that as part of the content. And if we look, that is 119 repositories. So this is a way to step up one level and get an amazing overview of the code that you have on your machine in total. All right. Next up, I want to show you a cool little feature called Control R. This is the reverse iSearch. Normally, I don't have the normal. you do Control R and you get this unhelpful blank place to type stuff in. Instead, you get this wonderful history, and you'll notice at the bottom it says Control Y to copy the command to the clipboard. That is a custom feature that I added to this little toolkit. So search for it and it puts it right on my terminal, and then I can amend it there. Still no cure for a typo, but it'll do. All right. So there are two ways to do that. Oh My Zeesh has some plugins that does substring history search, or you can use FZF, fuzzy find. I tend to prefer fuzzy find for a couple of reasons, and we'll go a little bit further into that. I already showed you Control R, and now I'm going to show you Control T. So clear that out. Control T is going through, and it has on the right, it uses a tool called BAT to look at the code. And it gives me a way to search for this, and I can proceed to go config, and then it'll give me that. I also mapped so I can do Control O, which will open that file in my text editor, which is kind of cool. Also Control Y will copy the thing to the clipboard. Next, I have Alt C. This one is similar to Control T, but it uses the tree that we talked about previously and shows all these different directories. Plus I get the RDF vocab and it starts searching on it. And it gives me an orientation of what files am I going to be working with if I jump into that directory. And once I pick one, it will CD over into that directory. Okay, fast forward through the configurations. Those are quite boring. BAT. So on the terminal, cat is ubiquitous. It's used everywhere to look at text files, but you can install BAT and get a little bit more out of it. Let's bring up my history. Oh, it lost it. Okay, we'll just build it ourselves. Git, derivative, rodeo, readme. Here is BAT. It shows it with line numbers as well as a little bit of syntax highlighting. And this works across a lot of different MIME types. So I like it. Another nice feature is it will show you invisible characters. I lost about half a day of my life trying to find a byte order marker in a CSV file, and that is no fun. All right, time check, fantastic. I'm gonna keep going fast. So methods, I wanna just do two things for Ruby. There are tons more, but I think these are useful. First and foremost, every object has methods. I'm running the script and it will kick out. These are all the methods it has. Nothing too super useful, but you can also run grep on that. So let's go ahead and do that. And instead it'll show the three methods that that string has that have the characters ID in them. This one is a little cuckoo bananas because first I have to make a Ruby file, write it, require it, and then find the source location. And I can say, what's the source location of the method world? And it is the second line of this arbitrary file. A cool little thing that I learned about this past year, thank you, I believe it was Shayna. We have the ability, if you use pry, to look at the method's source. That was the method that we wrote. Why is that useful? Sometimes you're in a debugger and you're like, oh, what was the content of the method that I just called? You can use the method object to find its source. I think that's pretty cool, helps you understand what's going on. Next, I want to encourage making fast feedback. This is how can you get your tests to run fast in a space where tests don't run fast. There are a couple of different tips and tricks that you can do. I just want you to kind of think about them because they require exploring and they're never consistent, but they are a fun little puzzle on their own. First, you can get rid of the spec helper and make explicit requires. You could also make a little gem to test the logic without it, or you can do the old file equal $0 trick, which is weird. Oh, what is that? That's a good question. So Ruby, when you do a require, it does not, you're not bashing that file, you are loading it. But if you call Ruby and the file name, it will know that this block where it says if file equal $0, it will know that you're running Ruby on that file and it will perform that. So you might be able to write some really fast tests or kind of poke at it in a different way when you have that little trick. Thank you, Perl, I believe, for that. Next up, I want to talk about Emacs, an over-the-hill editor in a Sisyphean world. So a little history. 3 years ago, I switched from Atom. It was deprecated, and I went looking for new tools, Vim and VS Code. I reluctantly shifted to Emacs, having tried in 2005. But given that Vim just never sticks in my brain, and I have some extreme issues with VS Code for other reasons, I settled on Emacs. And I'll say this, in 3 weeks, I was as productive in Emacs as I was in Atom, Sublime, and TextMate in the years before. And now I am continually improving my computering skills and tools, sometimes with tremendous leaps. I'm going to show you a few of them. You already saw org Babel in play, where I can add code inside a document and execute it. And you can do a lot more intense things. This is used in like scientific research or in presentations. But org mode also supports time tracking, personal knowledge management, to-do items, and presentations such as this, or even better formats. Next up, this is the whirlwind, information hunting and gathering. I'm going to slow down and walk through this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a clock, and then I'm going to navigate through code and accumulate things when I start that clock. So I have my agenda for today. I'm going to narrow it to today. I'm going to hop over here and I'm going to say, hey, Samvera Connect. There we go. Here's the clock time that I'm keeping. I'm going to start the clock, which is now running. This all is text, so I can change it. Okay, that's the simple part. And now I'm going to go, let's go to the derivative rodeo. Let's find the, what's it called? Step. Fits. Why not fits? And I'm going to just simply highlight this and push F8, and it prompts me, and I can say, all right, I'm looking at fits. What's that about? I'll close it, and I'm like, all right, let's go over to the test. Jumped over there real quick. I'm like, all right, let's add some more. Got this test, but what? So close that up and then close that down, jump over here, and here is me slowly accumulating the content. It's providing me the function name, where it's at on my file system, which is a live link, as well as where it is on GitHub. So I can, or GitLab, or some of those other ones. And it also took what I was writing. And what this then allows me to do is like quickly jump from different repositories, slam these things together, start looking at the code that I'm trying to, and perhaps make a playbook or some documentation. And all because I said, dump these things into the place where I'm tracking time, which I think is a pretty cool feature. So let's go back, pardon me, to there. Next one. This is a little quote that I have, a riffs off of Arthur C. Clarke. I have a lot of projects, personal and whatnot. My wife runs a small business, so I'm working on things there too. And what I created is this index of indices. And I'll show you. So here are the various projects: role-playing games, British Library, working with IU, the rodeo. So let's take a look at Samvera. I have 3 things that it will launch me to, either the notes I have on Samvera, the remote code, or the local code. Let's hop over to the notes. And this is my bespoke project index tool. So here are the notes. In the slightly grayer area between lines 15 and 1 is the metadata. And all of that metadata is queried using ripgrep to find the project stuff. Back to the presentation. All right, Tree Sitter. This one is a tool about syntax highlighting. And I wrote this silly little function that I never thought I would use all that much, but I was curious about Tree Sitter. And it turned out I used it all the time. I type the command, get the current scope function, and it finds the fully qualified module name as well as the method name, and it puts it in my paste buffer. And I can see it at the bottom. It was this little thing that helped me understand kind of where I was at, but also I could copy it and paste that into other things, which helped make things easy for writing a new gem. Next up is this menu that I wrote for my text editor. These are commands that are things I want to remember or call quite often. And these jump to will go to places that I want. So I'm going to jump to the Team Violet project board, and it'll open up a browser. I can also jump to PDFs if I've defined them, or local files. It has some MIME type sniffing to figure that out. And these menu items that I put on there, I put them there to be a reminder to use them or because I use them. So it helps me improve my personal habits of computering, as I like to think of it. This was something that started emerging as I was working with my text editor, is that I can write these super ephemeral functions. This one that I have here, I was pasting this into a numerous commit messages because I wanted to keep tracking where it's all going. And I realized, why don't I just make this function so I can do it really quick? And then when I'm done with it, I'll just delete it. This took me all of a minute to write, and I used it several times and saved tens of minutes as I might have had to go look up stuff for references. All right, so conclusion, work with your tools. Knowledge work is really about needles and haystacks. So helping improve your ability to navigate through needles and haystacks is a good thing. And last, I'll just quote the one thing from tabletop RPGs, like play to find out. We are all programmers. We should be playing with our tools to understand how we might better use them. Thank you. And I'll take any questions or a drink of water.
Thanks, Jeremy. We are just about at time. I know there's been some questions and some discussions in the Connect channel in Slack.
VS Code is open source. VS Codium is also open source. There is a blog about how VS Code was written to fracture communities that I have linked to in the past. So that is something to consider. But it's a good editor. It just comes with Microsoft's aggressive embrace, extend, extinguish agenda.
Another question in the Q&A. How many times do you use the e-pointer mouse on your computer? Do you do all of this without leaving the keyboard?
I do almost everything on the keyboard. I would say maybe 99% of the time. Like if I'm in the terminal and I push up to Git sends back a message that says, click on this URL to go to the PR. And I'm like, okay. And I have to click on that. So that's like one case where I'm like, yep, that's super easy. Oh, I should add, all of these things, anything that you pick up, just practice one thing for 1 week, like commit to it, and also look at like what's the general things and work your way through that. I spent a lot of time on the general and now I get into the very specific. Also, what I've found is in doing this, I am generating more ideas of how I can do stuff.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. We're at time. Thanks to all of our presenters today and for everyone for attending. I hope we'll see you all tomorrow. We've got a lot of great sessions and updates on the schedule. So we will see you then. Thank you.
Thank you very much.